Hey everyone, the live stream of the Las Vegas Stadium Authority board meeting will start in a few seconds. So I am here to live vlog it and to take you there in one moment. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just checking to see if the stream is good. And good Thursday to you, everybody. I'm going to switch over in a second. Stream is good. Or I say stream is good. Good. View on watch page there. There's watch page view. And I'm going to say hello. Hello. Like that. And then I'm going to switch over. I'm going to go down and switch over because I should be on now. And it is. And I'm going to put this on large, full screen like that. Turn on the unmute. And you should hear that. Let's see here. It's not coming through. That's interesting. You can hear me, right? Hello. You can hear me, right?
Being here.
Oh, here we are. Okay, now. Okay, no.
We will.
Okay, now I'm going to go down.
August 17th, 2017.
Switch over.
Las Vegas Stadium Authority board to work.
There we go.
And I will call the roll. Vice Chairman Epstein. Here. Mr. Hahn. Here. Thank you, Dallas. Mr. Hornbuckle. Here. Ms. Jones Blackhurst.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Newcomb. Here. Mr. White. Here. Mr. Taberti.
Here.
Tito. And Mr. Evans. Here. Ms. Fitzpatrick is also with us. County Clerk is also here. Mr. Guerra. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate you being here. If everybody's had an opportunity to review the agenda, I'd ask if there were any suggestions for inclusions of emergency items, deletion of any items on the agenda. And if not, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
I'd make the motion for approval, Mr. Chair.
Ken Evans, second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We will then open agenda item 2, which is public comment. Today we are going to limit public comment to one opportunity for each speaker. So you can choose to speak either prior to the meeting or at the end of the meeting, but we will not allow multiple opportunities to speak today. We just have a large agenda and we need to be able to work through that. So I would open it for public comment. Is there any member of the public who wishes to make a comment? Mr. Washington.
Thank you, Barry Lee. Oh, here's Mr. Washington. This ought to be good.
Am I on? Good afternoon. Am I on? Okay.
This ought to be good. Watch this.
And board. As we know from the last meeting, there is a strong demand for work of the African American population. I'm here to go ahead and give a little brief report on where we're at on the proceedings that was initiated by the so-called phony flyer. Let me tell you what the phony flyer is producing. There was 1,100 signature cards of interest that were signed on July 13th here. To date, as we move through that, we have some 250 ready scheduled to move to OSHA training, which we're in communication with certain community partners there. I am still having to go ahead and meet with the workforce responsibility to make sure that all of them are prepared to go to work there, despite the volume of numbers that I'm bringing to them. Maybe a little bit overwhelming, but nonetheless, SB1 is clear in terms of which population it is that needs to be going to work. And so that was my intent, and that continues to be my intent, as we will go ahead and prepare the target population ready for the opportunity. Now, when the opportunity comes, then we'll go ahead and see if it's a real opportunity. but they won't be because the people aren't prepared to go ahead and move forward. So once again, anyone here thinking that this was a ruse or this was just something that was made up just for fun, they can go ahead and think again as we're going to move down the path. We have maybe 30 or 40 GEDs we have to go ahead and put forth. We know that we're going to have a major task in terms of, drug testing and other things, but we're prepared to work through those things. Bottom line is, people can call it what they want. They just continue to go ahead and watch the action, and then they can determine what they for themselves. So I'm really not here interested in all the name calling and all the personal accusations. I'm only interested in preparing the people who are supposed to go to work to go to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Sir?
My name is Leonard Hamilton, and I'm the previous project director for the Minority Business Development Agency's Business Center here in Las Vegas. And I first caught wind of the statements that were made regarding the Community Benefits Agreement a couple of days ago. Excuse me, I've been walking kind of fast trying to get here, so bear with me. But I can't see how it's ethically or morally right to suddenly want to change a requirement that helped this legislation to go through. I mean, at the 11th hour. I mean, the statements that were made by Mr. White, they just didn't seem right to me. The community benefits with that does not require the use of union labor should receive no tangible benefits from the project, should demand that non-union contractors and employees be allowed to build.
Hold on a second. There's been some sort of change. I'll check on what he's talking about. I'll go back to this. Okay. There.
There is also a statement made regarding no strings attached that I read or on Twitter, and moving towards moving forward, maybe all construction projects should be done with no PLA strings attached. I mean, is it fair that your strings remain while of our community's quote-unquote strings? And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Other members kind of the public who would like to make a comment?
Kind of.
Chairman Sisolak, welcome.
Kind of. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. First off, I'm Steve Sisolak. Address is 500 South Grand Central Parkway. I want to thank you for your service and all the members, because I know what you're going through and the serious obligations, and of course the staff that you have, Jeremy and Brian, everyone have done a tremendous job. I know there's been a lot of discussion about this community benefits plan that's been talked about, but I'm going to surrender something here that I hold very dear to me because it sits on my coffee table in my office. This is Raiders Community Benefit Report. And if I'm going to pass it out to you, let you take a look at it and then submit it to be part of the record. You look through here and you see that the Raiders are part of Make-A-Wish Foundation. I can't begin to tell you. The Food Bank, Raiders Rookie Club, Davis Street. It's at Special Olympics. I can't go through the incredible number and the copies of the checks that they give out to these organizations. And when you get to take a look at the pictures that are on these pages, and you get to see the kids in the schools and in the hospitals and in the various areas, and you see the smiling just as big as the kids are. Who's getting the bigger benefit out of it, whether it's the community or it's the players. I want you to keep in mind that one of the big benefits we get as having the Raiders in our community is their involvement in the community, and I ask you to keep that in mind as you move forward. So thank you very much. I'll turn it in for the record. Appreciate it.
He's running for governor, by the way. Just want to let you know. And to answer your question, Barry Lee, yeah, there are a few people because the union didn't pack it. There's
Peter Gruzman, President of the Latin Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank Commissioner Sisolak for stealing all of my thunder. Thank you, Steve. Because that's exactly what I was going to talk about. So all the rumors flying around, I want to say exactly what the Latin Chamber of Commerce. I am asked by the Asian Chamber of Commerce to also put them on record.
but I'm going to let them do that. I'm going to speak about the Latin Chamber of Commerce and what we feel about a community benefits plan. When we think as a chamber about a community benefited plan, that what Steve just brought up is exactly my first thought. It never was, millions of dollars going to somewhere controlled by someone for something. I never thought that. What I did think was high-level Raider players walking into children's hospitals. How do you put a monetary price on that? We need to, because that's something that benefits the whole community. If we're really talking about a community benefit plan, that's what we should be talking about. The Raiders involved in our communities, in our youth sports, talking to young people, mentoring. That's what I see a community benefit plan. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that there was going to be millions of dollars forced out of somebody who wants to come here and do business, and that was going to be the conversation. And so we need to have this conversation, because I don't get it. What I do get is a community benefit plan. In fact, that stuff probably should have been worked out in a law or somewhere else. But I'm just telling you that as a chamber, we're all for a community benefits plan. We want to see minority groups working, and I think the construction people are doing a phenomenal job. We're in contact with them all the time. Some of our members are already working, and we're proud of that. But now we're talking about a community benefits plan. And so the Latin Chamber is absolutely in favor of a community benefits plan, one that would hopefully not have to use the word require, but would, you see that document you just turned in, the Raiders already show that this is what they do when they go into communities. So I want all of you to know, and I want the Raiders to know, the Latin Chamber of Commerce will be standing with them, helping them walk into, schools like we did this morning with Metro and the laborers. We went to school and we gave out goodies to kids with autism. It was amazing. And one of the kids said, "Do you think we'll ever get to see a Raider player? How do you put a price on that? Somebody tell me a price for that." Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. Anyone else?
Good afternoon. Hello, John Stevens, current president of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and I also have a letter I'd like to submit for the record. And I stand here representing the workers of those parents that Steve Sisolak was talking about, and that the gentleman from the Latin Chamber of Commerce was talking about. Those sick kids that you guys are talking about, they have parents that have bills to pay, and that's what we're here representing. So any help that the CBT can give to you guys, my number is 702-578-9335. If anybody has any questions, feel free to call me, and we can talk about how we can help out. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Sullivan, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. I'd like to thank Jane Jones Blackhurst, who I guess is on the intercom. I guess they dedicated a school to her. So I know a lot of people here in the commission do a lot of great things in the community and for schools. Each and every one of you is involved in our community, education, jobs. That's why we're all here today. Basically, in a nutshell, public comment, I just wanted to hopefully bring some points. I know with your legal staff, you have Andrews, Kurth, Kenyon. You also have Brownstein, Hyatt, Faber, and Schreck. One of the companies that they work with on a national level is a company called Navigant, really large consulting company. Basically what they do is they mitigate risk between the different...
well, I heard perfectly and now I hear nothing.
Navigant basically works with Brownstein Hyatt on a national level, and they mitigate risk between the different players in the agreement, whether it's the Raiders, the city, in the different public-private partnership. So I might recommend that that's reviewed. There's someone named Zach, who on a national level is like an expert on that. They're a really large consulting company. I don't work for them or have any affiliation, but it's really important that risk is mitigated, because different players here have different tolerances with risk and deal with it differently. I know that the banks are involved, the Raiders are involved, and hopefully that's been just addressed by your legal review people. I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Anyone else?
Yeah?
Well, we will close agenda item 2. Agenda item 4, which are chairman.
Hey Barry, yeah, the African American gentleman with the long hair did show up, and he said that he had a lawsuit against Tommy White, and that he alleged that Tommy White, I believe, had assaulted him or something like that. But yeah, that's the same guy.
The community benefit plan has been a source of conversation for the board and the community during public comment today. And I want to make a couple of things clear. First, I think good progress has been made on getting to an agreement on what a community benefit plan will look like. The entire community, and I want to thank Senator Ford for his help in helping to gather those thoughts, organize those thoughts, and crystallize those into actual proposals. I also want to thank the Raiders for their continued work on this subject. I do think it's time, and I think we have gathered that input. I think we have exchanged ideas. I do think it's time to get that community benefits plan done, and I will do everything I can. I know all the parties involved will as well, to bring back a completed document at our next meeting in September. I also think it's important to point out a couple of things, one of which has been already pointed out by Chairman Sisolak, Mr. Guzman, and others today. The Raiders are naturally a philanthropic and community-based organization. It's easy to see they're in business. They do this in Oakland, and frankly, the entire NFL is that way, and I think most people know that. So it's not surprising to me, and I don't think it's surprising to anyone else that the Raiders have already started to implement not only topics that will be in a community benefit plan, but philanthropic efforts in the community throughout the state, frankly. So everyone is in the right place to get this done, I think, over the next several weeks, and we will work hard to do so. We will hear from Ms. Littlejohn later today. We'll hear from representatives of the Raiders later today. I would certainly encourage you to kind of highlight some of the things that you are doing in the community. If you feel comfortable doing that, I think it's important for everyone to hear. The UNLV conversation, negotiation is proceeding very well. And I think if UNLV was here today, they would certainly say that. I think the Raiders would say that. I talked to both of them about the agreement yesterday individually, and they both expressed that to me. UNLV and the Raiders are the appropriate organizations to have at that table for that negotiation. To the extent that the Stadium Authority Board can be helpful, I'm sure all of us are willing to be. But those are the two parties to that agreement. This board needs to approve that once that's been signed. But first, and importantly, the Board of Regents, so the university system, have to approve that agreement before it can come to us. At the Board of Regents meeting that happens to be in Elko, and during the first full week of September, right after Labor Day, basically 3 weeks from today, the Board of Regents will receive a report on the status of that agreement. And I know everyone involved is working to get as much done by the time that regent meeting occurs. The regents have been gracious enough to express their willingness to schedule a special meeting of the board at whatever time is necessary in order to allow that part of this process to move in conjunction with the rest of the work that we're doing. So I would anticipate that special meeting of the Board of Regents would be sometime around the 1st of October. I would imagine that special meeting would be in Vegas, but that will be up to the Board of Regents themselves. There are a couple of documents that haven't quite gotten the same level of attention as those two. I just want to bring them up, make sure everybody's aware of them. They will certainly need to be on our agenda for review in September. One is a transaction and financing agreement This is a document that the county is currently working on. We expect a draft relatively shortly, within the next week or two. And then the Raiders and those that in the Raiders camp that it affects will have an opportunity to review that draft, and we'll be working through that. The other, we have talked about this, we have not had a review of a draft yet, but the development agreement that incorporates all the significant work that Clark County is doing regarding the high impact process, the permitting process, the work with the FAA is under review right now. The draft has been provided to the Raiders. There are a number of parties that are affected by that draft. They are reviewing the content, and that is another agreement that we will need to bring back in September. So those are just the 4 topics that I wanted to mention. Anyone from the board have anything that they would like to say before we close this agenda item? Okay, we will close agenda item 4, open agenda item 5, which is the approval of the minutes of Las Vegas Stadium Authority Board meeting of July 13th, 2017. If the board has had an opportunity to review the minutes, I accept a motion for any changes, and if there are no changes or questions, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, Ken Evans for the record. I did have one note, section item 12, which was the portion that discussed the development of the community benefits plan. If memory serves me correctly, I know we had some discussion about getting a monthly report or a meeting report every meeting about the status of some of the things that were ongoing. So I just wanted to find out if staff could verify that indeed we did have that discussion and that it was agreed to. And what I was happy to hear is that they do plan to have Ms. Littlejohn here today, but just wanted to have that in the record in case I did remember that correctly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Evans. Any other comments, questions?
Motion to.
Just a program, anyone who thinks this is smooth sailing has no idea. First of all, they don't have a community benefits plan. Second of all, Steve Hill's job is to paint a rosy face on everything. Third, the UNLV agreement is not done. So there you go.
We will close agenda item 5, open agenda item 6, and we will receive a staff report from Mr. Guerrero. Mr. Guerrero, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jeremy Aguero. A few things to go over with the committee in terms of staff's work over the past 30 days since the committee last met. Mr. Chairman, you alluded to a number of the documents in your way. I'll try not to be repetitive, but just hitting on a couple of those. On your agenda today are 3 items. That is the personal seat licenses, the non-relocation, and the estoppel and recognition agreements. Those we discussed today. The attorneys from both sides have worked through those. There are a couple of what I would classify as relatively modest business issues that remain on those. We'll talk about them a bit today. In terms of the county's process, I did want to note that the expectation by the time the Stadium Authority Board got to its meeting today that the land use application would have been heard before the County Commission. That was delayed for 3 weeks until Wednesday, September the 6th. The reason for that delay was that the county must have the FAA 7460 process completed with a no hazard finding before the proceeding before proceeding with the public hearing. It is actually their requirement because that was not out at that time. They had to continue the item until the meeting in early September. The FAA indicated that they are close to a decision. As a matter of fact, we got information yesterday, at least a preliminary report that indicated that the FAA did not find any particular issue. However, they were holding open public comment until September 22nd, at which time they will end public comment and issue their final finding. We are unsure about at this moment is exactly what that means in terms of the county's process. We've reached out to the county for that. We'll work through that and certainly let the Stadium Authority Board know in terms of what is required. I do think it's important to put on the record that county staff did indicate that in all other aspects of the development process, they are moving forward. They have received all required information as expected at this point from all other elements of it remain on track. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the development agreement. I also want to express my thanks to the Raiders and the various folks that they're working with to work through that agreement. I know there's a lot of parties that have input on that, and it continues to move forward. With regard to the joint use agreement, Mr. Chairman, UNLV did send a letter along with the system of higher education. Both Mr. Riley, the Chancellor of INSHE, as well as President Lynn Jessup, did ask that letter be read into the record. So with your permission, I'd like to do that. It reads, Dear Chairman Hill, our sincere thanks to the Las Vegas Stadium Authority Board and to the Raiders for your time and effort in making a domed, NFL-ready stadium a priority for Southern Nevada. We are grateful for your hard work, ensuring UNLV continues to be an important partner in this great opportunity. The partnership among the Raiders, the Las Vegas Stadium Authority Board, and the Nevada System of Higher Education is not just about football. It is about building a better community for all Nevadans. We've been asked many times about ongoing discussions of the joint use agreement among the parties. Without getting into the finer points of negotiation, we can say we are making great strides from where we began our conversation with the Raiders and have reached consensus on many items. There is still work to be done, but we are optimistic about achieving the desired results to the benefit of all parties. We look forward to our continued work with the Raiders and the Las Vegas Stadium Authority Board to give UNLV football and the great fans access to a stadium and accompanying game day experience that will rival the best in college football. Cordially, Tom Riley, Chancellor, Lynn Jessup, President, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Mr. Chairman, relative to, you mentioned both the community benefit plan as well as the transaction agreement. I will not add anything to that. I do want to make the board aware we may have one additional document. I know everyone's excited about having one more document to have to review. Today, we're going to talk about the sales and marketing agreement. There is also a purchase and sale agreement that is actively underway. We expect to have that done by the September meeting, Mr. Chairman. The other portion of the documents that are required are what we have referred to as the Section 29(1) documents. These are a series of findings relative to the NFL giving the Raiders permission to move, the Raiders electing to move. These are largely formalities, but are important findings for purposes of Senate Bill 1. We continue to make progress on all of those fronts in cooperation with the Raiders, again, with thanks to them. There are a couple of additional agreements. These include the team use agreement. There's also something that we may talk about a bit today called the recognition agreement and the STADCO obligation agreement. These are agreements that are essentially between the team and third parties that relate to some of the documents that we have. Again, I'll brief the board more about those as necessary and appropriate as we move forward, but these may be some other documents, all of which are actively moving forward with the help of all parties involved. Mr. Chairman, I did want to also mention that we have reached out to ICON in cooperation, of course, with the Raiders organization relative to receiving all of the development-related documents. Of course, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the idea of the development agreement itself. There's a lot that goes into that in terms of design, development, and specifications, and those type of things. Many of those documents are being submitted as part of the high-impact process with the county today. We wanted to make sure that the committee had access to those documents as they were being submitted to the county in an effort of trying to shorten the time frame to the best, to the degree responsible to do so as part of the the stadium authority's deliberations on similar items. One other note that I wanted to have in the public comment section of your binder, which is section number 2, there's a number of letters, correspondence that we have received. Anything that the Stadium Authority Board receives, we try to make certain that the Stadium Authority Board members have access to. I do want to draw your attention at the last meeting during public comment, Mr. Tony Marnell came forward.
I'm not laughing, I'm just listening. It is funny, though.
Transportation, those type of things. He submitted 2 reports. that are included in there that are essentially additional information provided by analyses done both in terms of the state's transportation study as well as the Kimley-Horn study done on behalf of the Raiders. That is information that was submitted to the Stadium Authority Board. Did want to make sure that it was clear. Of course, there's many conversations that come up with regard to all things relative to the development agreement, the development of the stadium itself, as we conveyed to Mr. Marnell and others who have asked similar questions. The Stadium Authority Board is aware of these particular issues, continuing to monitor them, but certainly allowing the county to go through the high impact project process first, at which time it will become an item that is ripe for a conversation before the Stadium Authority Board. With that, Mr. Chairman, there are two minor updates, or two, certainly not minor, but two additional updates that I think will be brief relative to the website itself and what traffic is there. I know that we get some questions about that, both from the public and from committee members, as well as the progress of the collection of room tax, which of course is important to our process and the financing. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to turn it over to Brian Haynes for an update to the committee on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Brian Haynes. First update will be the vendor interest registration traffic that we've received. We've received about 50 additional companies, interested vendors over the past month. That brings the total to about 380 up to this point. About 230 are small businesses. And as previously noted, we continue to share those lists with Mortensen and McCarthy so they can go.
Excuse me, I would definitely dismiss something he says very easily. First of all, the FAA report issued preliminary findings that said that more study was needed, including the public study. There was only one type of radar, the IFR rather than VFR, for which there was no finding of interruption, for want of a better term. So he didn't tell the complete truth. He should have just simply read what the FAA posted, it's public, and moved on. So I disagree.
Which was about 7.6% above our budgeted number. Preliminary numbers through June, we have an additional 3.8 million collections. Again, that is also ahead of our budget projection. And for the 4-month total, collections so far were 17.1 million, which are just under 16% of the budget total. And with that, unless there are no questions, I'll pass it off. Back to you.
Thanks, Mr. Haynes. I'll just make one comment on the, I'm sorry, Mr. Evans, go ahead.
For the record, Ken Evans, just a couple of clarification questions. Mr. Haynes, regarding the vendor interest forms that have come in, are some of the forms more along the lines for either vendors or concessionaires once the stadium is actually built?
Yes, when we initially set it up, we were collecting registrations for all potential vendors, including construction and operations. We're still getting a little bit of both and trying to direct construction-related vendors directly to Mortensen McCarthy. We're continuing to collect all of them, and when there is a stadium operator in place, we will then share that list with them as well so they can look at potential concessionaires and other operations-related vendors.
Okay, and very quickly, procedurally, are we sending them at least an email or some type of auto reply or auto response so that they know that they are indeed in the system?
We do not. We do not.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Possible idea to consider.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea.
Jeremy, I had another related question, but Mr. Haynes already addressed it, so forgive me, everyone, if it seems like I'm jumping ahead, but I know that there are interested parties out there, especially on the vendor and the concessionaire area, and I just want to make sure that they get their interest expressed and that we have a procedure to follow up with them to let them know that they are in the loop. Thank you.
He's hard and fast on making sure there are
just a brief
following the minority
the board
issue.
You probably don't need, but to let everyone else know as well. As the revenue comes in higher than expected, if that were to continue, basically what we are doing is buying down the bonds on the early part of the revenue collections. The amount of funding in total that the Stadium Authority will put toward this project is $750 million. There is what we call a pay-go component of that $750 million, which is being collected and what is Mr. Haynes is tallying here. To the extent that that number is higher than what we projected, it will allow us to, and allow the county, frankly, to bond at a lesser amount. Then, if we continue to have higher collection amounts than we had projected, we will have options.
You're going to have to emphasize this. There's a difference between challenging and dismissing. I'm saying, based on what you wrote, that I definitely check and challenge. And in order to do that, you have to pay attention to what someone says. But I've been at this for over a year, and there are a lot of discrepancies in what are presented. They are charged with presenting a rosy scenario. Okay? So that's what's going on here. All right, I'll unmute.
Mr. Chairman, that is the staff report.
Any other questions for Mr. Guerrero, Mr. Haynes? Okay, great. We'll close agenda item 6, open agenda item 7. Consider the ratification of a fascinating report that apparently we have to file on a quarterly basis. So, Mr. Guerrero?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I was equally surprised by this requirement, but nonetheless, we have made every effort to comply as required by the state of Nevada. The board is asked to consider and ratify the authorization for the Clark County Department of Finance to submit the Stadium Authority's quarterly economic survey report to the state of Nevada Department of Taxation pursuant to NRS 354.0615 and NAC 354.559. Mr. Chairman, this is an item for potential action. The quarterly economic survey is required by the Department of Taxation. My understanding is that this is intended to provide a bit of an early warning system to the extent that a local government of some kind is having instability, or that there is instability in a region of the state of Nevada. It provides a summary of financial conditions, including significant events that may impact the authority's fiscal status. It is provided under agenda item, or the tab 7 in your document. You will see all of the individual questions that are asked. I will not go through them, although I'm happy to, Mr. Chairman, if there was something that you would like me to do. I would note, however, that most of the questions for the Stadium Authority were either answered no or in A. There are 2 questions in which the Stadium Authority was required to answer yes. Question number 2 regarding the assessed land value growth of 10% or more in the past 2 years, of course a positive sign, not a negative one. And question 8 regarding whether the Authority Board borrowed money for operations. This refers to that bridge loan that you'll recall that the Stadium Authority received very graciously from Clark County prior to the room taxes actually starting to flow to the Stadium Authority. Of course, that has been paid off at this point in time. The document is required by the state 45 days after the end of every calendar quarter. Because of the timing at the end, the August 1st deadline, the form was already sent to the state. In the future, we certainly will make every effort to present these surveys to the board prior to the transmission deadline. Mr. Chairman, that's the end of this report.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Any questions for Mr. Guerrero? Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion for approval. Bill Hornbuckle for the record.
Tommy White, second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Okay, we will close agenda item 7, open agenda item 8, and welcome our representatives from the Oakland Raiders. We're going to ask them to come have a seat. I think it'll be a little easier to have a conversation than it will if we make them stand at the podium all afternoon. Welcome, Mr. Bedine. Are you sitting as far away from me as you can possibly get?
I did. Before you hear from members of our project,
No. The red button in front of you.
Thank you. Before
before you hear from the members of our project team, I did want to address a few points and thank you for the kind words about our community engagement, and to Commissioner Sisolak and to Peter as well. There are a lot of things that we do well. There's a lot of things that we can improve upon. But one thing I know that we excel at is community engagement. And you see that in the Bay Area. You see that everywhere where we touch people, and you'll start to see that here. And I wanted to introduce someone who's in the audience. Aaron, would you stand up? So Aaron Wright is our Vice President of Community Relations. And I think it's worth noting that she was the first person we put on the ground here. She's been here about 2 months. It wasn't anyone in construction. It wasn't anyone in revenue generation. It wasn't anyone in PR. Well, the first person we put on the ground was someone in community relations. And she's been meeting a lot of you and meeting a lot of people in the community and developing those ties and those relationships that are going to last generations. So please, if you want to speak to her afterwards, she also brought some more of those books that Commissioner Sisolak so graciously gave up, so we can replace that for him. And if anyone wants to take one, they're welcome to it. I want to thank the folks at Local 872 for adopting Erin and taking care of her. And if anyone messes with her, we're holding you responsible. Wanted to clarify a couple things that have been in the public. Confirm that we did get contacted by the members of the 2026 World Cup bid committee. And with your permission, I've worked with Chairman Hill. We're putting together that bid. We're going to ask for some help from some people here. The bid process is very exhaustive and will require a lot of teamwork, probably from a lot of you up here as well as some of your business contacts. But it would be a tremendous opportunity for this building for future Super Bowls as well as future drafts. And we'll keep you posted. We'll keep you posted on that bid process. It's also very exhaustive, but I know Las Vegas can deliver both an incredible bid package as well as an unrivaled experience. So we're eager to work on that. I want to address this head on because I read about it every single day, and that has to do with parking. I know how important it is to everyone in this room, everyone outside this room, and you should know it's of more importance to our organization and our owner, because game day for us and any event that takes place at this stadium, the experience starts long before you go through the turnstile. It starts in your house when you get ready, and ingress, egress, and parking is a very important part of it. It's something that we've worked on for decades in Oakland, and we're working on exhaustively here. We're looking at every possible option that's available to us: surface parking, structured parking, off-site parking, shuttles, the impact of the monorail, rideshare, taxis, Lyft, Uber. We're really leaving no stone unturned, and Don will expand on that a little bit. We're asking for a little bit of patience. I know nobody has any, but we're working on it. We'll continue to work on it. I think you've seen our results so far in the last 20 months in working with us, and we'll continue to work hard on it. So I didn't want anyone to think we were ignoring it, and Don will certainly address it. I'm going to turn it over to Don Webb, and he can continue our presentation.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Webb. And Mr. Badin, when you said it was something you were reading about every day, I wasn't sure which topic you were going to bring up, but glad to hear about parking. Mr. Webb.
Thanks. Good afternoon. The project team, as you know, already has a very talented team of world-class experts in the design and engineering and construction field. We hope to leverage, and we expect to leverage, that experience and expertise and those capabilities to the community's benefit, and that's been a great sense of the discussion here today, and it's a daily discussion among the project team, so that we can benefit the community in terms of contracting and job opportunities. Lynn Littlejohn, who is overseeing that for the Mortenson McCarthy joint venture, is with us today. You've heard from her before, but I asked her to come today and give us a brief update on the progress that we're making so far and some of the efforts that have taken place.
Welcome, Ms. Littlejohn. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Just going to provide a brief update with regard to our kind of activities that have been going on as it relates to community engagement and outreach to involve the community in the project to date. I think I spoke last month a little bit about kind of our hitting the ground running and the kind of outreach events we've had, specifically the kickoff event that we had in June, really to announce the project to the contracting community that was attended by over 1,300 individuals, so a huge success. We followed that up with, I think, the issuance of the first request for proposals to start engaging subcontractors on the project, and along with that held a pre-proposal event in early July, again to make sure that the SBE community, small business community, minority and female business community was aware of who the potential proposers were going to be, and then just the entire RFP process. We have now moved to those proposals having been submitted to us at the end of July. The language in SB1 was included in those RFPs with regard to the 15% SBE goal. So all of the proposers were required to come with a plan, kind of an outline of how they intended to achieve that SBE goal. And I can say, having been here most of the month of August so far, sitting through interviews, scope reviews with those proposers, that they all have embraced the goal, embraced what we have asked them to do with regard to outlining a plan, talking about specific scopes of work, firms that they have already reached out to from the meet and greet we had with the pre-proposal. So I think we can say that commitment from the proposals committee of subcontractors are here. As we go forward with making recommendations for awards and bringing on these firms who are all design assist firms currently, the goal commitment will be a part of their contractual requirements. So they will, be obligated to fulfill the commitments they make as it relates to small business participation. We have also made sure, I think, just from a due diligence perspective and outreach perspective, as mentioned earlier, created the project website, put a vendor registration form there that has been very well received. We have over 800 registrants on that site currently, with approximately 450 of those having identified themselves as small businesses and small businesses who meet the definition of the language spelled out in SB1. So that is very positive. We have taken that information and communicated it out to all the proposers to give them a pool of contractors to be able to engage with. And again, during the interview process so far, many of the proposals have said that has been very helpful and very beneficial with them in being utilized. We have advertised the proposal process. We have sent it out to all of the firms who are in our database. And so I think in terms of communicating opportunities and timelines to the community here, that is going on an ongoing basis. I think the other piece we hear a lot being talked about here is the whole workforce opportunity. And people are thinking they're behind the 8 ball, or that something has occurred and they have been left out. I just want to assure the board and the community that that is not the case. That we have talked previously that construction will commence at the end of the year. So we are in the process now of outlining and developing kind of the recruitment and referral process. Myself will be starting to meet with community workforce organizations here to help them understand that process. We will also put on our project website kind of the timeline of hiring, timeline of specific trades and scopes that will come on site, so that, again, the workforce individuals, residents here know when those opportunities will exist. But I will just remark that with regard to that, we anticipate holding the same kind of outreach event that we had on the subcontracting side for the contracting community for the workforce community, again, to spell out timelines, announce contractors who have been selected for scopes of work, what trades will be employed up under those specific scopes, and when they will commence work. But just a high level, we anticipate pretty much in the first quarter of 2018 for the excavation and site work and utilities work to commence. And I'm just talking about major scopes of work that will really have significant workforces behind them to complete their scopes. In the second quarter, the concrete work will commence. Third quarter, steel, the structural steel. And then fourth quarter, and this is all in 2018, the MEP, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. So again, just wanting to reassure you and reassure the public and the community that we are months away from construction starting, and there have been no workforce opportunities that have been missed, and we surely will communicate and conduct the same kind of outreach on that effort that we have on the subcontracting front. So I think just in closing overall, so far I think it's gone very well. Our due diligence, our kind of boots on the ground, I kid to a certain degree that my family thinks I have relocated here and did not tell them. We have actually relocated a lot of our project staff who are here full time now, and it's going very well so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Webb, before you go on, I'll just ask if the board has any questions. Mr. Hornbuckle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Littlejohn, I guess maybe somewhat of an unfair question, but I guess I would ask the process as well as the question. When this oversight committee comes into play, and its makeup I know is much discussion around when it is, but ultimately I hope that there is a reporting process and a structure that's put in play that is, at least to this commission, given quarterly or some frequency thereof, so it can have an overview and a monitoring of what is in fact being done on an ongoing basis. And to the extent it actually lived on the website you're mentioning, which we have done historically, it's very productive. So I would make that ask and really ask, what are we, if anything, entitled to, given there's an oversight committee in the middle of this eventually?
Good question.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, Mr. Hornbuckle, Senate Bill 1 is not what you'd call particularly specific relative to this, but in the second section, section 29.5, in the second paragraph, it does talk about monitoring and enforcement.
Yes, it does.
I think I can speak generally for, it at least requires some ability to be monitoring what is happening over time. That has absolutely been part of the conversation. I think I can say it, and again, I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth, but I think from what Ms. Littlejohn just said, from an internal standpoint, this is already happening with the organization, and so it's putting it into a format that allows for the type of reporting that's necessary to ensure that progress is being made and the requirements are being met without asking and creating an undue burden on the raters and their development team in terms of having, a substantial reporting requirement. That is part of the conversation. It will continue to be part of the conversation, and we have heard Stadium Authority Board's comments relative to them and continue to work forward on it.
If I can just kind of comment on that. I mean, we are have a process and procedure in place in terms of being able to collect and track subcontracting information for the project as a whole, in terms of who we have made awards to at first tier and how they plan to make their realize the commitment they make as it relates to SBE, and to be able to track it all down at all tiers and how much they are getting paid on an ongoing basis to make sure that the commitments they made are actualized and those dollars are spent.
This part is still a mess because they don't have proper oversight in place yet. She's still new, so this is still a mess.
And I'll say for the record that from the Raiders' perspective, we agree with Mr. Aguero's assessment of the way that's laid out. We know it's general, but we also know that generally the obligation exists, and we're certainly looking forward to working through how that all comes forward.
Thanks, Mr. Petrelli. Mr. Evans?
Yes, thank you for the record, Ken Evans. Mr. Littlejohn, opportunity here to share something I think is positive. It's been brought to my attention that there's a group or an effort underway to get some of the smaller contractors to team up and to do some capacity building. And I'll also state for the record, I want to thank my colleague at the Latin Chamber for being part of that effort, the Nevada Contractors Association, and then the Urban Chamber, just so everyone will be aware, is kind of working through NAMAC, the National Association of Minority Contractors. But again, if you could just maybe very briefly let people know something that's being done to help smaller contractors participate in this effort.
Yes, I can comment about the small business community build capacity and grow their firms. So one of the things we are working out the details with now is what we're kind of calling a small business resource center. Mr. Evans, I think that's what you're referring to, is really for firms involved with the project to help them build what we call kind of their back of house functions. Yes, it's important to get the contract, but it's important to be successful in the execution of that contract, and then making sure that, again, those back of house functions, we help firms kind of grow those. And what I'm talking about is anywhere from kind of their estimating capability, understanding, you know, project management, all those other kind of components outside of just the physical execution of the work that you need to have in place and need to understand how to make sure it runs accurately for your project to be successful, for your contract to be successful. So we're in the process now of establishing that resource center, and we'll have more information to communicate out to businesses that are involved with the project, how to take advantage of that.
I just have one question for you. This may be a little too detailed, but you know, typically on any construction projects, 6-7 trades are going to aggregate to a very large percentage of the work that's done. And when you have a 15% requirement like that, and you have 6 or 7 trades that are going to consume the majority of the subcontracting total, are you within those major trades, or are you looking for those prime subcontractors, and maybe that's not exactly the right term, to subcontract some of their work? How do you deal with the fact that if you don't pick a small business to do a major trade, getting to 15% seems to me to be pretty good?
Yes, we actually do conduct kind of a projection exercise to determine where we believe the availability lies within all the divisions of work that we will procure for the stadium, and looking at both from a first-tier perspective and in a second and third tier where we think that participation will come from. And so we look mainly in the general conditions sections where we think that the small business community, women and minority businesses typically tend to play, if you will, in the second and third tier market. So we have identified or assigned goals to every single contract category, so that if they're not a first tier, that first tier firm then yes has to come back to us with opportunities both from subcontractors, suppliers, and vendors to meet that goal.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. Anybody else? Okay, Mr. Webb, thank you.
Thanks. In a minute, we're going to show you a video. I think we'll try to concentrate on before the representative from Bank of America talks to you, is about the status of the design and how that progresses. This is going to be a video that's essentially a revision and an updated version of a video that was shown to the NFL during the course of the relocation application consideration by the league. It's updated to reflect the current state of the design, however. I would like to say one thing about the way that a video like this and the other renderings that I'll be sharing with you today are produced. Today, and especially on this project, all of the architects and engineers and even the contractors are working in a very highly sophisticated computer environment called Revit. And essentially Revit is the design software that literally allows them to build the building inside of a computer. It's not just a computer-assisted design program, but it literally requires you to lay in every 2x4 and every nail and every screw in order for the building to be held together. And so one of the benefits is avoiding conflicts and really being able to pinpoint materials and sequencing and that sort of thing. The other advantage that is meaningful in today's presentation is that the images generated out of Revit are literally the images of what is being designed. And so when you look at this video or you look at the still shots that I'll show you later, I'll refer to them as renderings, but bear in mind they're rendered out of the computer software, which is literally the backbone of the design. They aren't an artist's expression or interpretation of this, which is what many of us are familiar with when we look at architectural renderings. And my experience, at any rate, is that most of those renderings take certain liberties with the hard, cold friction of reality and kind of smooth it out a bit. And that's not the case with the renderings, or in this case, the animated renderings, the video that are produced in Revit. I would be remiss, though, not to say that even though this reflects the literal state of the design as it currently exists and as it's evolved from several months, the project's design and engineering is far from completed. it will look very complete to you, but it's far from completed, and therefore there will be changes and revisions and improvements to it as this effort progresses. But I'm happy to share this video with you and present the state of the project's design, and then once the video is completed, I'll take you through some of the more detail. If you wouldn't mind.
The very foundation upon which the National Football League is built is the home where each team plays.
The next phase of the new era.
A place for history and generations
to benefit our community.
Our city's next iconic entertainment district,
The best football and event stadium in the country. These stadiums are where stories come to life. It's where legends are born and legacies are made.
Tennessee has pulled a miracle!
And it's here where the next chapter of the NFL begins. Welcome to Southern Nevada, home of dazzling Las Vegas. A booming market with extraordinary business opportunity. This thriving city is a top destination for American and international tourists, attracting more than 42 million travelers annually. Known for exceptional shopping and dining, the only thing that's been missing from the entertainment capital of the world is a home team. Declared the brightest spot on Earth by NASA, this electric city will light up even more when the Raiders come out to play. At Las Vegas Stadium. This sleek, state-of-the-art venue with a stunning one-of-a-kind view is the new home for the Silver and Black as they enter a new era of greatness. Guaranteed to deliver an unprecedented entertainment experience. Las Vegas Stadium boasts a location ready to host the NFL's biggest events. The Pro Bowl, the Draft, and the largest stage, the Super Bowl.
The build-up is over, and away we go.
With over 150,000 rooms to accommodate fans from around the world and provide an unrivaled Super Bowl week experience. This vibrant city is practically designed for the biggest event in sports. The future is bright for the Raiders and NFL fans around the globe as the next generation of the world's greatest game begins in Las Vegas.
There's even less parking, I noticed. Just a note, there's even less
parking. As I mentioned
parking.
before, we have a really talented, creative, and experienced stadium design architect among the other members of this team, David Manica and his firm. And it's probably not completely appropriate. How do I get control of the slides here? If you don't mind. There we go. It's probably not entirely appropriate that a beyond middle-aged guy sitting in a gray suit is going to try to describe to you what was in this very talented creative architect's mind that inspired the design.
There's nothing wrong with beyond middle-aged guys in gray hair. Gray
yeah,
suits,
right. With failing eyesight, by the way, but I'll do the best I can. I can certainly describe what was kind of in the Raiders' minds or what it inspired us about David's design. But of course, he could only describe his own inspiration personally.
Just describe it,
himself.
please.
At any rate, some of the images that he showed us during the course of the very early design inspiration stage relate to the shape and kind of the feel of the facility. The idea of a stadium is certainly nothing new. You know, the Roman emperors in the Roman Colosseum, which took 8 years to build, by the way. We're going to do ours in less than half of that, but 8 years to build. Pretty well nailed the idea of seating bowls and egress and sight lines and things like that. But what has changed enormously is the functions of the building, the revenue generation, the kind of telegenic aspects of the events that go on there, and certainly the feel and the look of the facility. So the feel and the look of the Las Vegas Stadium has, you know, several kind of attributes. It's sleek. He wanted it to be fast. We like that idea. Strong, yet lightweight, sexy, unique, and black. It's in terms of the position on the site. The Russell Road site, as you know, the approximately 62-acre site, just to the west of the interstate, just to the south of Hacienda, bordered by Russell Road on the south and Polaris on the west, is oriented in a particular fashion to take advantage of the ingress and egress aspects of the surrounding streets and exit ramps and roadway system. It's also oriented so that we can accomplish a couple functional things beyond that. One is, you'll notice on this particular slide, to the left of the stadium itself, there are areas that are not really parking, but they are developed for ride share, drop off and pick up. Really, you know, we're in the first generation of the Uber and Lyft and ride share phenomena in terms of designing an NFL stadium. You know, it wasn't really a factor before. And so we're trying to look down the experience window and anticipate that and not simply treat it as an afterthought. And the site's also orients the stadium slightly off axis from north-south to a northeast view out of those large sliding doors that you saw in the video. I'll come back to that in a moment. To take advantage of a really unique view of the strip itself. So we wanted the fans inside the stadium to have that view of the strip, and we wanted, frankly, some of the very large buildings, the Panorama Tower, some of the MGM properties, to be able to look down into the stadium and get a glimpse of what's going on inside. The highly transparent nature of the stadium, both from its roof, as you can see through here, and the kind of the curtain wall or the envelope of the building is very transparent, and we wanted to take advantage of that. It's also oriented this way so that the natural grass field can roll out of the building and into an outdoor area. You see on this particular rendering, just to the lower right of the stadium, the place where the field will reside, so that it can grow in natural grass, and so that we can develop the most vigorous first-class playing surface possible. Let me back up for 1 second. So the roof is highly transparent due to the use of a material called ETFE, ethylene tetrafluoroethylene. I think I have it right, which is a high-strength clear polymer that has the characteristics of glass, but is much, much lighter, much more flexible and forgiving, and in certain circumstances like this, far more durable. It can be manufactured so that we can tone down the sun, so that we still have natural light and the feel of being exposed and being able to see the sky and clouds and things like that, without all of the infrared heat generation of clear glass. So there will be a frit on this. And because it's so lightweight, the structure necessary to support it can become very much lighter and very less visually cumbersome. Instead of a series of very heavy steel trusses holding up heavy panels of glass, what we're looking at and what you'll be seeing here is a series of very high-strength stainless steel cable trusses. Literally, the structural backbone of the roof will be a series of very, very highly tensioned stainless steel cables that will support this clear roof. The exterior, as I said, is about to be shown. There is heavily tinted glass and sleek black metal panels that are interrupted periodically by the flowing steel accent bands that tie this exterior together. And as I said, this gives it that kind of sleek, fast, strong, sexy look that happens to be black. And the eastern side, as we rotate around, and you can kind of see the pit that when the field is in the building, that pit becomes available for other activities or maybe even parking, depending on the type of event. As we rotate around, the eastern side features a very large video mesh that allows the fans indoors to actually see through that video image, but people on the outside, especially from a distance, will see whatever's being projected there, and we could literally project video. Not in the same high resolution or definition that we will on the indoor scoreboards or the indoor video boards, but certainly from a distance, that will be very recognizable video without impeding the view from the inside of the stadium to the outside. And that wraps around, give you a little bit better image. By the way, although we're showing Raiders images there, we would never show the actual game. It would be too much of a distraction, and the NFL would have a few things to say about it as well. On the north side, I mentioned these very, very large opening doors to give the stadium an indoor-outdoor feel, because it will be in
Dust
reality
storm.
an indoor-outdoor stadium.
Dust storm, dust storm. Just saying.
Is much more expensive, much more massive, and much more intrusive movable roof. And we've chosen not to do that because we don't think it's practical. We don't want to risk the money involved in that. And this happens to be not exactly the same technology or approach that was used in Minneapolis recently at the US Bank Stadium, but they too have a series of very, very large opening doors, operable doors. In their case, those doors pivot on hinges, so the doors never really go away, but they simply open. In our case, these are intended to slide and completely out of the way to, as I said before, expose people from the outdoors to a bit of an image of what's happening inside, and especially give people indoors the view of the strip. On the north side, that's kind of the main entrance, although there will be several entrances around this building. Throughout the circumference of the building, there is a public terrace, public concourse built around the stadium. But at this particular point, we think it's probably a great Facebook and photo opportunity for people to post on social media. And this, on non-event days, will probably be where tours begin, and just serendipitously, that happens to be where the gift shop will be located on the lower floor. So again, to the south, you can kind of see this, and this just shows an indication of what it would look like if and when we have pyrotechnics on the building, which is still being studied exactly how to do that, both with an eye toward the surrounding neighborhood, the FAA, and the fact that we have a polymer roof, which is not all that forgiving when something really hot hits it. So
no kidding.
That further, but this, again, this is an image and generated out of the Revit machine, so it's very literal in terms of how the building is currently being designed. I mentioned a moment ago that there's a retractable field involved, and the very strong aspiration of the team is that we play on a traditional all-grass first-class field. And so there are a few ways of accomplishing this in an indoor building, and the best way we think at this point is to grow that grass outdoors and move it indoors. We don't think it's practical. We don't think it provides the very best playing surface to take the field in pieces and put it down. That's been done before, and in our view, not particularly successful. It's not the quality that we want. So the field that you're looking at that literally slides in and out is a full-size football field in a tray. And that tray is approximately 4 feet deep, and it contains not only the playing surface, but all the subsurface irrigation systems, drainage systems, and support systems for that. So you can imagine the weight involved in shoving this football-sized field that's 4 feet deep, full of wet earth and plumbing and the steel framing necessary to support that in the first place. It is massive. And so not only is the tray, moving the tray itself, a massive operation, but the ability to do that and move it in and out of the field is not an easy task as well. With 20 feet apart, maybe 40 feet apart, something like that, and radiating out from the center. So, without thinking about it, there would probably normally be 60 or 80 major structural columns to support 7 decks of seating and concourses and restrooms and concession stands, and the weight of the building itself, which, if those columns were in place, this 170-foot wide tray would not be able to slide in and out. So that end of the building, the entire end of the building, are supported by these enormous steel trusses capable of carrying the weight of all of that concrete decking, seating, plumbing, concession stands, restrooms, side of the building, and portion of the roof. And so that is no mean feat to design and fabricate that, and it comes at a serious cost. But it has an additional benefit. In addition to allowing us to roll the field in and out and therefore grow a first-class natural turf field outdoors, it also provides 14.5 feet of clear headroom, 170 feet wide. Most stadiums, even most first-class stadiums, have a tunnel through which a tractor trailer can roll in and roll out, maybe 2 tunnels. And that becomes important for the staging of a major concert. You know, a few years ago when I was involved in a facility and U2 was playing at a stadium, they had 27 tractor trailers with their staging and rigging and equipment, all of which had to be moved in to a stadium over a 3 or 4 day period, set up, and then disassembled and taken out. And of course, when you're dealing with 27 tractor trailers coming and going, and all of the other forklifts and attendant equipment there, going in and out of 1 or 2 14 feet wide tunnels becomes a bit of a choke point. One of the benefits of rolling the field 170 feet wide in and out of a building is we essentially have not a 14-foot wide tunnel, we have a 170-foot wide tunnel, and it's designed so that it's 14.5 feet tall, so that the tallest over-the-road tractor trailer can go through unimpeded, or in this case, as you see, if you look very carefully, buses could park under there. So it's a very large marshalling area. When we've talked to UNLV about this, one of their issues is, well, how do we get a 100-plus marching band marshaled for the field? This also provides a superb area for that sort of thing. So it has lots of uses to it, but it's one of the side benefits of the consequences of having the field roll in and out. And this shows you another aspect of that field tray where it would, when rolled in, what we could be doing with that on event days. Sectioning through the building along particular nature of this EFTE roof and the cable, stainless steel cable net truss system supporting it, and this kind of slices through the building, showing essentially 7 levels. Some of those levels are not continuous all the way around, but at this particular location, there are 7 levels with numerous clubs throughout the building, from the field level, where members of that club can actually walk out onto the field pre-game or even at the edge of the field during the game. And each one of these levels essentially has a complement of clubs and other amenities, and including, by the way, the general admission area, which is, we're probably not going to call it a club, but that large indoor-outdoor plaza just behind the operable doors near the torch is a general admission seating area. And if anything, it's an enormous club. There are 3 very high resolution video displays. In the view that you're looking at here, it shows the 2 that flank that opening. On the opposite side of the building, we have one that's essentially twice the size of this. We couldn't have one of those on the north side and still maintain the view of the Strip through that series of operable doors, which is why we have two there. Those video screens are very high resolution and are comparable to and would be among the largest in the NFL. They won't be the largest, but they are comparable and they are among the larger in the NFL. This gives you an idea of, let me back up just one slide here. It's a bit of a lag. There we go. Inside the bowl, people from indoors get a bit of a view up the Strip and the nightlife of the Strip. This particular shot evokes that. The construction schedule, let me just touch briefly on that. That's not really the heart of the message today. We have a challenging construction schedule, or I should say a challenging project schedule. Most of the challenge is during the design phase, because we're allotting 31 months for the actual construction. And that 31 months is comparable to what Mortensen Construction, the lead on our contracting team, our building team, constructed U.S. Bank in a stadium in Minneapolis. Again, a fixed roof facility with an ETFE roof. In their case, it wasn't cable net, it was steel, with movable doors, without a roll-in, roll-out field, by the way, and all the attendant steel and structure and complications that provides. But at any rate, so 31 months, they're confident of that. Where it's frankly much more challenging is during the design and engineering stage.
Right.
And so we're going to accomplish that by, among other things, overlapping the design with the actual construction, and doing that through a process known as design-build. It's a very accepted delivery method in large-scale projects like this. The other kind of somewhat unique aspect of this schedule is that we'll actually begin construction before the design is nearly completed. There's an enormous amount of earth to be excavated and caliche to be blasted out or taken out. And so once we have enough information designed for the foundations and for the actual depth of the facility, our anticipation is to begin the excavation of the site slightly before the end of this calendar year, and then move into the final phases of design necessary to fabricate and order long lead items such as the steel, and have that ready to roll by April. And doing that allows us to compress things and overlap things that on a more leisurely schedule would typically not be compressed or overlapped, but does it in such a way that we don't risk the budget, we don't risk the quality of the building, let alone risk the completion date, which is very, very important to us. We are, as a project team and as the Raiders, focused on 1,000 things, thousands of things involving the stadium, but there are three that really command a disproportionate portion of our attention. One is the budget.
Right.
And it seems almost trite to say that within a nearly $2 billion project, we would ever be concerned that there would be enough money to cover everything, and there's not a day that goes by that we're not aware of the need to maintain the budget. Even though it's a big number, and maybe even especially because it's such a big number, controlling the budget is very, very important to us, because if we were even 1% off, that's very, very serious dollars.
Yep.
So budget is at the top of our focus each and every day. Secondly is the schedule, and as I indicated to you, it's a challenging schedule. It's one that's doable. We're essentially doing 4 years worth of work in 3 years.
Yep.
But Las Vegas is a uniquely suited location to try to execute that sort of schedule, to execute a huge, high-profile, spectacular project without delay on a compressed schedule. It's uniquely suited for a variety of reasons, we think. One is, and our contractors believe this as well, one is that the contracting and workforce community is a highly experienced community on projects of this nature. And while they haven't built a state-of-the-art NFL stadium here, they've certainly built major, high-profile, very high-level finish and quality projects on what would otherwise be considered almost unthinkable times. So we're counting on the contracting community and, frankly, the workforce community to be uniquely suited for this challenge. Secondly, is that the governmental support system here in Clark County is sophisticated and experienced when it comes to these projects. In many other communities, it would be unthinkable to be sequencing a project like this and getting quality and qualified and experienced attention from plan checkers and the community development directors and even the elected officials here who have lots of experience in overseeing and supporting from a governmental standpoint projects of a similar magnitude and quality. And then third, obviously, is the weather. It's not Minneapolis. Yeah, okay. So we're counting on those things. So the first thing that occupies an awful lot of our attention is budget. The second is schedule. The third is parking. And it's no surprise to us that the 62-acre site, once we carve out an enormous footprint for a stadium, can't support 16,000 automobiles.
Nope.
It's just not a surprise at all. It wasn't even a question as we were looking at acquiring the site, and it's of great importance to us, but it's not a surprise. And as Mark mentioned before, our customers' experience begins with their decision on how they're going to get to the stadium and where they're going to park their car. It's not. It doesn't begin at the turnstile. It also involves how they get back home, whether it's through rideshare or to a satellite lot or on the monorail or walking or driving their personal automobiles home. So that game day experience involves transportation and parking, and that's keen to us. The code requirement for our project in Clark County is to provide 16,000 spaces. So if you do the math, with approximately 2,500 spaces on site, we need to pick up another 13,000 or so spaces.
14,000.
Within the immediate environs of the stadium, in the colored areas there, and this is not to suggest that somehow we have access or control of each space that's within these colored areas, but within this this map on the shaded areas, there are in excess of 75,000 existing parking spaces. And in addition to that, if you see what appears to be, to my aging eyes, very dark blue, that's the Valley High Golf Course. So if Valley High was thrown in there, it could easily accommodate on the developable portion of that 13,000 or so spots. So I would just close by saying the parking solution hasn't been finalized, but it's always been at the top of our mind. It is something that we are working on diligently, and just like the design and engineering of a very complicated building, the design and engineering of a parking solution is both well underway, but still a work in progress. And so I'm not embarrassed to say we're not prepared to share the final plan with you, because we're just like we're not prepared to share the final plan on the structural steel or the seating bowl or anything else. It's still a work in progress. The parking plan is still a work in progress as well, but it will be solved well before game day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. That was an exciting and thorough presentation. Thank you. Just so the board knows this, we will address the design issues with respect to the stadium at future meetings. At some point, it is our responsibility to weigh in on the design and hopefully approve that. Certainly from a outward perception, it's
they need to ask about drainage with respect to the roll-in, roll-out field. That's a big issue. Drainage and also the sandstorms. Wow.
To put together a list of design diligence questions for the benefit of the board as kind of a starting point for thinking about that. Frankly, an easy place to look. You have an opportunity is to just go to a couple of the development agreements and the appendices on those development agreements at other stadiums, and there are design specifications that are included in those development agreements to give you kind of an idea of, I think, generally the questions that the board should be thinking about and having. And I'm sure the design team and the team itself are going through those as well. I don't particularly expect to find flaws when we ask those questions, but I think it's incumbent upon us to ask them and make sure that there are appropriate answers to them. Given that, but with that said, if you have questions for Mr. Webb, please feel free.
Come on, guys, ask something.
Mr. Hornbuckle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo all of Steve's comments. That is awesome. And I'll have some independent, I saw a couple of things that interested me, and we may agree or not, but what is noteworthy and continues to be the issue, and I appreciate your comments on parking, is the plan. And it had not been for the FAA stopping potentially a vote in the county this week, I think this commission then would have been forced to ultimately make that you have up to a year to get parking resolved. The great news is the stadium is in our neighborhood, particularly speaking on behalf of the company I represent on the board. The great news is it looks magnificent, and I think it's going to do amazing things for the community. Save that one issue. And the notion that we would vote on something at this scale and we lease 750 and not have parking clearly understood remains concerning at this point in time. And so I hope, given this deference of time that we have, given what the FAA may or may not do, that we come to some further resolve. So I just want to urge that. I know it's very complicated. I respect that. But I want to make note of where I think we were headed versus now where we are, make sure we take advantage of this time, because it remains a concern that we have a plan that doesn't satisfy, frankly, relinquish the authority of this board and its money, and then it's not ultimately understood. And so that would be my only substantive comment.
Mr. Evans?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one, I want to make sure I heard correctly on the design. The roll-in, roll-out field, you mentioned for U.S. Bank that was not done, or that was part of it. Okay.
No, U.S. Bank has an artificial turf field, and our owner is very, very keen on having a really first class, not just a natural turf field, but a really first class one. And so our design thinking is that this is the best way to accomplish that.
Okay, so then just my quick parking lot follow-up question is that I'll be interested in is, has this been done, has this design or this particular design been done before?
It has, actually, and we've learned from some of their experience. It's not been done on any sort of wide-scale basis, but it happens to have been done in a similar climate, in a somewhat comparable time frame, and is an NFL stadium, and that's the University of Phoenix Stadium where the Arizona Cardinals play. And they have a similar roll-in, roll-out field. I'd suggest that when we're done with our project, it probably will be a little more advanced than theirs. But we've learned from some of the things that they experienced and experimented with, both in terms of the design, the constructability of it, and the long-term maintenance, because that field has now been in service for 10 years or so. So we're able to see what the life cycle actually has proved out, some of the underlying issues supporting the field.
Other questions from Mr. Webb? I just have one, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but the roofs have caused probably the most problems at stadiums across the country. And obviously this is not retractable, so we don't have all those moving pieces, which is great. Is the roof repairable? I mean, I don't understand the ETFE makeup, and they mentioned it's sensitive to heat. we have a little bit here. So just kind of curious if that is something that can be relatively easily repaired. Once it's repaired, does it retain the same quality, or does it look like what happens when I try and fix a hole on my windshield?
Well, first of all, my comment about it being sensitive to heat was in the pyrotechnical sense of heat. If a flame hits it, there's only a limited period of time that it's going to resist that flame. It's not sensitive to the maximum, 120-day or even much higher than that heat that would normally occur periodically in Las Vegas. Secondly, let me just try to describe the ETFE structure itself just a little bit more. It is not a single filament stretched over this cable net surface. Part of what gives it its resilience and its R factor, its insulating factor of the building, and its strength is that it's actually formed of enormous pillows. So think of not just a single layer of ETFE, but think of a pillow, top and bottom, and it is lenticular, and it is pumped full of high pressure and regulated air to maintain that pressure. So there's a series of remote air compressors and sophisticated software that's constantly monitoring the pressure in each one of these pillows. We haven't selected the actual pillow size that will be manufactured. One thinking is the pillows may be as large as 40 feet wide and 260 feet long. So we're not talking about pillows the size that you would have in your home. I don't want to leave you with that impression either. And these may be up to 8 to 10 feet in depth at their deepest, in the middle. Then they'll be welded together. So first of all, the monitoring of the pressure inside those pillows is constant and computer controlled. Second of all, if there is ever a puncture, it's repairable. And although I don't think Mark could pay me enough to walk out on the roof, one could. And an experienced workman can walk out on the roof and work on this. It will support far more weight than that. Actually, when you think about it, it has to support a downpour. It has to support enormous wind loading. One of the challenges from an engineering standpoint, especially with these operable doors, is to design a structure of this size with that kind of shaped roof, which when you think about it, starts to begin to mimic an airplane wing, the leading edge of an airplane wing. And we're designing a building currently with an eye toward winds in excess of 100 miles an hour. And with those operable doors, the pressure of the wind rushing through in a situation like that and lifting this very lightweight roof, the structural engineers, when I talk to them, are working as hard to support the weight of the roof. They're working as hard to do that in keeping the roof from flying off because it's that lightweight. But in terms of its resistibility to things like flame and things like that, one, it won't support flame. So the fire department likes this material very much. Two, it is repairable. And three, it is replaceable in those sections because it's not one continuous piece of material.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Any other questions?
This board's weak. I don't ask any questions.
That was a great presentation. We'll look forward to talking with you again. We will, unless you have something else in that agenda item, we will close agenda item 8, open agenda item 9. Welcome Mr. Elliot McCabe from BMA.
Bank of America.
Now, Mr. Bourdain to make an introduction if you'd like, or Mr. McCabe.
All right, here we go.
Thanks for having me today. First of all, who's controlling the slides? Is that?
You are.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me here today. Elliot McCabe, Managing Director and Co-Founder of our Bank of America Merrill Lynch's Sports Finance and Advisory Group. I'm here today to talk about the financing and give you an update on the status of the financing.
Mr. McCabe, I apologize if I could steal 90 seconds before you start. I think it might be helpful just for the board to understand the process and what we have in mind. I asked, Mr. McCabe is from North Carolina. We asked him to come across the country. I think everyone on the board has had the opportunity to talk with Mr. McCabe really in more depth around the financial capability and the financial plan for the project. We do want to thank you for coming out. This is hopefully just the first of two conversations about that. As you know, in SB 29.1, we have a responsibility to make a determination that the financial capability is there to build the stadium. We will receive the presentation today publicly. If you have questions, please feel free. Some of those questions you probably have had answered privately. We have granted confidentiality to some of the information that the Raiders and Mr. McCabe have shared that is in keeping with what was in the Southern Nevada Tourism Act. So I want to make that clear as well. If we get to a point where someone has questions that would infringe on that confidentiality, please feel free to speak up or poke me, and I will talk about that as well. But I just wanted to point that out. Wanted to have the opportunity for the presentation today. We'll bring this agenda item back at the September meeting, hopefully for approval at that point. It does give the opportunity for both the board and staff to answer any final questions that we may have. Although I do want to thank the Raiders and Mr. McCabe for the extensive amount of time that it does take to meet with the individuals on our board and the length of those meetings. I appreciate all that work prior to this meeting. So anyway, sorry about that.
No worries at all. Thank you for that lead in. We're going to start out with a slide here. Before we jump into this update, tough act to follow with all the exciting stadium stuff. Talk about banking. Do what? Yeah, exactly. Don't have a video, and I'm not going to try and teach everybody how to be a sports finance expert. That being said, I did want to make sure we shared with the group today sort of how we analyze and evaluate these projects. I've been doing this for 25 plus years, and we're a leader in the space. I've done many NFL stadiums and other venues around the country, and several international evaluate these projects, and specifically this project. Before we jump into this update on PSLs, when we evaluate a project like this, we're certainly looking at really two phases. The part that Don was talking about, the construction phase. So we have to get comfortable on our end because we're being asked to write a big check to fund a significant portion of these costs. We have to be comfortable, just like everyone else, that that the budget is proper. Because construction, getting it built is the first step. It has to be built for the Bank of America to get repaid. We do not get repaid unless it is finished, and that is the second phase of our analysis, which is analyzing the cash flow streams of the private enterprise that are generated in order to pay our loan back. So with that, while there hasn't been a lot of push yet on the revenue side, because we're still in the process of designing the stadium and working towards really getting the construction started in earnest here in the next time period. It is important to note that the Raiders have had tremendous success, which we see that and take great comfort in the support that this community has shown the Raiders in terms of relocating to this market. And here, what you see here is 50,400 plus personal seat license deposits that have been submitted, and obviously sets the team up very well for their ongoing efforts once they really gear that up as construction begins. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but with that, we'll so that's the first sort of sign of revenue generation and support, which is really strong. The next slide is a bit redundant to one Don showed earlier on the bottom part in terms of the construction timeline. We're as interested as you are in that process, because we're funding the project, you're funding the project, the NFL is funding the project during that time frame. Leading up to that time frame, we've listed a few key milestones here that have been instrumental in getting us to this point where we really got into the mix here. Aside from what I'll note is a 25-plus year banking relationship with the Raiders, as it relates to this project, we really got geared up around Super Bowl time in terms of evaluating and analyzing this. And the Raiders were submitting and talking to the NFL about their relocation application, which went up for vote at the end of March. And it was worked very hard with the Raiders to be in a position to provide them a commercially financed, underwritten transaction for the full amount of the loan, which we think was a big positive as it related to the NFL voting 31-1 to support the relocation to Las Vegas. That was a big milestone at the end of March. Since then, the NFL has reviewed your stadium lease, the stadium lease that the Raiders have with the authority, as well as our financing structure. And so obviously we have the support there and are moving forward towards working towards financial closing. The next big events will be, for us, will be Q1 of 2018, which is when the Raiders anticipate delivering a guaranteed maximum price contract, and then stadium construction can begin in earnest at that point in time. One of the comforting things actually being here today, as listening to all the people before me and the authority and the people who stood up and talked about this, is that any project like this, one of the keys to success is the public-private partnership. And just listening to the support that this project has on many different fronts is comforting to us and further validates what we already thought the case was when we committed to the financing. In addition to that, and so let me keep up with my slides here. So on the top level of this diagram, the key partners here, the authority and the Raiders, and I would say the authority sort of represents the community and the Raiders, and those are the key stakeholders here. We obviously have a big stake in it, and we're making a loan, but it's driven by the vision of the authority and the Raiders in terms of what's happening here. I would say that assembling a strong project team is a must-have for any type of project like this, and we think based on what Don walked through in terms of the team you've assembled on the construction management side, that has been achieved. And then you'll see some other people listed here, other companies on the sales and marketing side, Legends and other consultants, Icon, and legal teams that have been assembled to make sure this project is successful. As I mentioned earlier, the success of the project for us is seeing the construction completed. That's how the engine gets created to retire our loan after the construction is completed. I will move on to the next slide. Let's see. Where is it? There. I'm not going to go into this. This is a further overview of the project team. Y'all can look at that at your leisure. Just gives you a little bit of background on who the main players are. It doesn't represent all the parties, but it certainly represents the main players that help create, business plans and construction plans that are ongoing. And you can go up and down the list, and the level of experience that is on this list is really one of the stronger teams that has been assembled in sports finance, and that's something that we take a lot of comfort in. Okay.
Come on, Elliot. Get your act together.
The budget first. So this is an overview of the preliminary sources and uses. I think these numbers are consistent with what you have previously seen in terms of the primary sources to fund the up to $1.8 billion project, or the public contribution from Clark County, $750 million, the NFL G4 funds, up to 200 or 200, excuse me, PSL proceeds of 250, and then a stadium construction loan of up to 600. The stadium project costs are really broken out between hard costs and soft costs. The hard costs on the project will likely come in somewhere between 1.2 and 1.3 billion. The other soft costs are made up of things like land acquisition, which has occurred, and I think, as you all know, the land that has been acquired will be contributed to the project by the Raiders once things get started. Contingencies, other soft costs, financing costs, legal costs, things like that are also included in the soft costs. So you break out the hard costs at 1.2 to 1.3. Those soft costs, in the aggregate will total up to, 5 to 600 million in extra. The practice facilities outside of the scope of what we're financing, and that's anticipated to be funded by the Raiders. Back a slide. In terms of a financing overview, what we're highlighting here, just in more, I guess, of a written form, is what we just went through. You're very familiar with the bonds you're committing to this project. The NFL G4 financing, that is a program that has been utilized in most, if not all, of the new stadiums that have been built in the NFL. The NFL has instituted this program and is the only league in professional sports that has instituted a formal program to loan money to help facilitate new development and, in some markets, renovations. Clearly, the new stadiums are the ones that sort of really get the $200 million. That is a loan program. Just to give you a brief overview of what that program is, basically a team, in this case the Raiders, would go to the NFL, submit their business plan. The league would look at the revenue generation of the club, and in particular, the incremental revenue that is being generated in this new stadium from the baseline of what they generated previously. And that incremental money is evaluated. When the NFL, they have and we'll get into this in a little bit when we talk about some of the underwriting parameters that we look at, but the NFL has a high degree of revenue sharing that it has, and it's these incremental revenues, a portion of the ticket revenues, teams, it's not theirs. They have to give it to the league to be shared with the league at large. So basically G4 is funded by an exemption that the league grants a team that qualifies. They get an exemption from having to share those incremental ticket receipts for a period of 15 to 25 years. And those monies are what retires the $200 million G4. So it's really independent from, really the stadium flows we're looking at financing. So, that's really sort of the overview of what the G4 program is. And it is a loan program that is a proven facilitator of stadium development. If you look back at history when they instituted this, a number of stadiums that had sort of not been underway were completed because of the institution of that program. And then lastly is the bank loan that was committed, up to $850 million in a multi-draw term loan facility. This facility will be
see, I told you 850 million, not 650, 850.
As monies are required to build the stadium. We will have a finance code set up, a little bit more probably detailed than you really need, but we're setting up a finance company to sort of be the borrower, and this entity will be the entity that essentially buys the $250 million PSL portfolio from the authority, and then Finance Co will actually make loans to Stadium Co for up to $600 million to fund its portion of the new stadium. And as I mentioned earlier, the land has been acquired by the Raiders already and will be contributed to the project. This may be way much more detailed than you want, but we want to make sure that we were doing a thorough vetting of our decisioning and why we are comfortable with our bank committing to underwrite this loan and why we were comfortable entering into that arrangement back in March. The following slides will present some key considerations that basically what I'm really providing you is sort of the analytical framework for how we evaluate these projects and have done so for a very long period of time. The first one I mentioned earlier was the importance of the public-private partnership. It certainly underscores the support of the authority, the NFL and the Raiders. All parties are making significant investments, financial investments, also investment in the market through relocation and costs associated with that in terms of coming into a new market, which some of that's measured by dollars and cents, and some of it you can't really measure financially. I think the key as it relates to this project is the alignment of interests that is present in this project. I mean, I think all parties investing in this project are interested in seeing that the stadium is completed on time and that post-completion is a success. And I guess from a community perspective, there's a strong positive impact on the local and regional communities, as it says here, in terms of your tourism, entertainment, and the business sector broadly. No doubt it was the attractiveness of your market too that helped us evaluate and helped the Raiders evaluate this market as being an attractive home for a new NFL franchise, given your stature in the tourism and entertainment industries. The next phase of the framework is looking at ownership, management, and the development team. We've certainly already talked, I think, at length about the quality of the development team. The family, the Davis family, have been owners in the NFL since 1963, among the longest tenured in the NFL. As I mentioned earlier, we have more than 25 years banking experience directly with the Raiders, and all that has been phenomenal. The Raiders is an iconic NFL franchise. Then they're only one of 32, and so that is a big item of success as it relates to moving into this market. Segueing into the market, the demographics are important. We analyze the demographics. We certainly rely on work that the Raiders have done in terms of assessing. The NFL did a lot of work in assessing the depth of the market to support the NFL team, as well as other events. And the market passed muster with all parties. Consultant reports validated and verified that. And we already talked about the success of the PSL program earlier. The NFL's business model weighs in heavily in terms of our comfort with transactions like this. There's only 32 member clubs, and there's only several teams. There's two markets that have 2 teams. So there's 30 of the top U.S. markets have NFL teams, and that's it. So there's a huge scarcity value to having an NFL product in your market. The competitive balance I talked about earlier comes from, among other things, the equitable sharing of national revenue streams. All of national TV is shared equally, whether you reside in LA, New York, or Green Bay, or Charlotte, or Las Vegas. And that provides a very strong underpinning for the team to put forth a competitive product. And I think that's why the NFL product year over year is very entertaining and achieves the highest levels of popularity of any of the sports in America. The other aspect of the NFL that we take great comfort in, which I think y'all would too, is the league governance. The league takes very seriously its financial health of not only the league, but its member clubs. There's certainly a rising tide theory that the rising tide floats all the boats, and they want to make sure that all the boats are operating properly so that you don't have the reverse impact someday. The league is very active in this process. They're lending $200 million into the program. So they've done a very rigorous approach to analyzing it as well. And that has been certainly integral to this project. And then you look at the strength and the continuity of the NFL, their management, and their ownership. These teams do not change hands that often, and they don't relocate that often, even though we sort of had a little bit of a, you've had several here in the last few years, but that's a bit of an anomaly. If you look back over a longer period of time, it just does not happen that often. On the next page, getting into the overall plan of finance, it is designed and it's been evaluated. A lot of it's proprietary in terms of how we do things from a credit perspective, but it is designed, as are the league rules, designed to have this work towards achieving an investment grade profile. The importance of that is it just opens up access to capital down the road once this project is up and running, or sometime before then. The Raiders may choose to look at alternative funding markets to finance it in longer term markets than what the bank market provides. And working towards that investment grade profile will help facilitate greater access to capital in the future for the Raiders. I mentioned earlier the phases of what we look at: construction and operational. The next bullet point under adequate and customary controls and contingencies. I mean, we really do. I'm not an engineering expert. We have hired a firm to sit beside us and work with us and to engage with the project team, who will oversee and manage that process for us in terms of monitoring the progress of the project, and as well as being involved in the approval process for submissions of payment. So we're very confident and comfortable that we have assembled a team to also interact with the broader team and to make sure that things are moving forward on time and on budget. In terms of our underwriting commitment, it is based on customary market terms that have been successful in other stadium projects. The PSL plan that is in place is modest in comparison to some of the other programs you may have read about. The average program has ranged from $300 million to $550 million over the last several projects that are what I would call market-based projects. And so for them to be sort of on the 250 side is a bit modest and something that we find very achievable. Moving on to the next part, in terms of during construction, we know that the on time, on budget, and in scope aspect of things, I mean, that's something we really take to heart, because it's got to be finished. And when I say in scope, what I'm talking about is basically the business plan they've shown us is based on a stadium that delivers certain revenue streams and revenue opportunities, whether it be luxury suites, club seats, a certain number of seats in the seating bowl, signage opportunities, etc. And that's the type of project, that's the scope of the project that needs to be delivered. So we have an eye towards making sure we're all getting good value for our money. And then the on-time aspect of it is fairly obvious. The quicker you get the stadium operationally, the quicker you're generating cash flow. And then obviously the budget aspect of it is important to us. And with the hiring of the independent engineering monitor, et cetera, we will always require that the project be, fully funded. Sources equals uses. That's fundamental to our projects. The next one, post-construction, we have evaluated their business plan. We've used consultant reports. We've used information that we've gleaned from proprietary other projects, and the NFL has certainly provided proprietary guidance in terms of what the yields can be from a revenue perspective. It's those cash flow evaluations and looking at it long term from an investment grade profile that have helped us quantify what the debt quantum will be. And so we're very comfortable that we've been very rigorous in down that front and evaluating it, as has the NFL in terms of their overall assessment and approval. In terms of just the last comment I'll make on this presentation is that this financing structure, while there are unique aspects of it, and this is a very state-of-the-art facility and will be it'll set a new bar, I'm sure. from a financing point of view, it's very comparable to other financings we've done in terms of size, scope, and scale. So that provides us with the comfort and the conviction of funding this project. In terms of other things that we've relied on in this process are the long-term arrangements, the leases, the non-relocation agreements. We want the Raiders here as long as you want them here, and they intend to be here for a long, long time. So those are things that are all important to us as we look at the repayment of the loans. And then finally, we fully expect and will get customary NFL consents and approvals before we close the formal loan. And so, with that, I'll conclude my remarks on the financing. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. I appreciate that. I'm going to ask you a few questions, some of which I'm going to ask in order to highlight what I think I know to be the case, and maybe I'll find out that I don't. One's around the budget and your role in B of A's role, your subcontractor's role, and I don't know if you're permitted to say who your subcontractor is. I think it would be helpful if you could, because I think everybody would know who that is. In making sure that both the project is built on budget and that changes that may be recommended or may come up, how they're dealt with. So if you could kind of re-emphasize that a little.
Well, yeah, I haven't asked the company if they were okay with us publicly disclosing it, so I'll defer that part of it. But it's a good question on the controls. So anytime we structure a transaction like this, the GMP, I mean, a lot of work is going to be done on the front end of this project over the next 6 months in getting a GMP delivered. That is going, the planning and that part of it and the design build nature of this contract is going to mitigate a lot of the concern around
cost overruns.
Don't know what a GMP is. It's the
guaranteed maximum price contract.
Yeah.
Right. So once those things are set, we're going to know going in before dollars are funded, our dollars, your dollars, the NFL's dollars, that there's a set GMP in place. So that really does, that's going to set the stage for the baseline. A normal credit document would include provisions that would govern material change orders, and they would require pre-approval in order to make them. So, I mean, there are certainly things that can pop up that are immaterial, that if it moves from one line item to another, it's just not material. But there will be a level of materiality established, and we take an active role in that. And we don't just defer the decisioning to a subcontractor. I mean, that party is there to guide us in terms of evaluating where they are with the building of the project and the budget, and to say yes or no, it's not going well, but to help identify and give us a third-party independent party to talk to and to consult with when things like that do occur. But I mean, I would say that in terms of the design build nature of things, it's not anticipated that there will be significant change orders, but if there are, there's a plan in place to deal with it.
And you referenced that it may have gone by pretty quickly when you talked about making sure that those change orders are fully funded. Can you explain what you specifically mean by that?
Well, before we fund anything, the project has to be fully funded, meaning that the chart I showed earlier where the sources have to equal the uses.
Right.
So what you're building, you have to be able to pay for.
Right. That's
important to us, and it's important to you, and it's important to the Raiders and the NFL. So again, this alignment of interest in making sure that we can pay for this. And so change orders that are material, could have by definition, could have a pricing impact. And to the extent that it requires additional funds, those funds would need to be, that would be part of the decisioning on whether you accepted the change order or not. But I would also say that part of any GMP, part of any stadium project, is having some level of contingency built within the budget already. So, there's certainly customary provisions that will be required and will be a part of this deal where there's customary contingencies to deal with things like that. But I do think that the work that Don and the team are doing on the front end, that's really going to set the stage for a successful project.
Great. And then, obviously, the Raiders have a relocation fee that they are required to pay in order to move to Las Vegas. Your underwriting took into consideration the relocation fee and the fact that the Raiders would need to pay that.
I mean, like I said, we banked them for 25 years. There's a team entity, there's a stadium entity, and that was absolutely factored into the decisioning, both on the NFL's part in terms of them being able to pay them and it getting paid. So we were very comfortable with the arrangements that are to be made in terms of making that payment.
Which means they haven't been made. They haven't been.
And the last question I have an alternative.
Which means they haven't been done yet. Keep that in mind.
About the package being investment grade, and I think that's worth highlighting. And could you explain a little more what that means? What the target of investment grade level is, and the significance of that I think is important. I'd like you to just highlight it.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, these are projects that, as we talked about, have long dated agreements in place, and in order to really help facilitate the financing, accessing longer term money, 20-25 plus year financing is important, and so that's we in the NFL like to gear these projects towards an investment grade profile, and what that means is basically there are various rating agencies out there that are necessary to approach if you want to access longer term capital markets. I mean, the bank market is fully capable and able to finance this over and over and over again. I mean, there's no issue there. This is more about creating optionality for the owner to access long-term financing. And obviously in a rate environment like we have today with low interest rates, accessing the long-term markets and locking in a big portion of your capital over a 25-year period is a good thing to do. So what we like to do going into these projects, and the league's rules, and we're for full disclosure, I mean we're a lead bank to the NFL and have been for 20 plus years, and so we're very familiar with sort of how these things work as well. But their gearing and their rules are sort of established towards making sure there's maximum flexibility for the teams to access these markets if they so choose. There's no requirement for them to finance it long term. That's really more of a team choice. But the profile is sort of established by various rating agencies that follow the sports sector. Not all rating agencies follow the sports sector. The sports sector is a niche market. It's robust. There's billions and billions of dollars that have been issued in stadium financings and team financings and league financings, many of which we've led, and we've actually helped over time pioneer this rating agency evaluation and accessing longer term markets. So it's all geared that way. I mean, it's without getting into too much detail. It's different from whatever league you're in. I mean, all these things I went through earlier where I was talking about the framework of a financing, the rating agencies that follow sports have their own criteria. It wouldn't surprise you that their criteria isn't far off of the framework that I laid out. Credit in that analysis is credit analysis, and that's what they're doing. So, I would say that projects in the NFL might be a little bit different than a project in MLB. They're similar. They're very similar. Some or NBA or hockey or whatever. So, but I think from a cash flow perspective,
You're getting a little arcane on us.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to dance around a little bit, but
don't dance.
I think from an investment grade profile, really what they like to see is kind of a 2 times coverage of debt service, and I mean that's really sort of the bogey for an NFL team.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay.
Other questions on the part of the board?
Come on, board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things to ask to kind of have something on the record. You mentioned the fact that there's the G4 funds, $200 million, but you mentioned the fact that the way things are structured, potentially those are retired within 15 years of the completion of the project. So one concern is great foundation to get started with financially, but years down the road when we may need to do a major capital investment to either upgrade or maintain a state-of-the-art facility, is there the ability, once we retire the initial $200 million, to come back later on and access this fund in order to do a capital improvement or something similar to maintain the state-of-the-art facility?
I mean, the G4 program is not a perpetual program. So those programs are established by the league ownership, and they sort of determine how long those funds are available. Typically, those monies have been utilized for new stadiums, whether or not they're available for.
Mr. Boudin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've explained to us in the past that the possibility exists that G4 funding would be available for upgrades in the stadium and has been used for that purpose.
There have been some examples. The league had a program prior to G4 that was originally called G3. So there were some teams that paid off their G3 loan and then have come back once those have been fully paid down and done some renovations and tapped into the G4 market. I think what Elliot's explaining is that 15, 25 years from now, it's hard for us to know what 24 out of 32 owners are going to approve.
Right.
If it was tomorrow and it was paid off, we might be able to go for it. So.
Right. But at some level, that program's existed for a very long time. And the other thing to consider, Mr. Evans, is that if you remember 3, 4, however many meetings ago, we went over the fact that the leases it's set up has a very aggressive capital improvement fund in it that contributes contributions from the team at a level higher than other comparable leases to sort of belt and suspenders address this concern.
Good point, Mr. Petrelli. Thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Rumble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of, and I'm not sure exactly your answers, but I think they ultimately relate back to financing. And maybe some of this you can't disclose, but time frame is aggressive, recognized, and believe me, there's a community that can do it. This one can. We've all seen it done. But it's aggressive. So my question is, because I see what's happening in Atlanta, where they dropped the Georgia Dome, and it's like, uh-oh, we got a kickoff coming, and they literally are working, as you know, 24/7 to get that done. That means the meter's running. Where are your deal with Oakland is year to year?
We have a lease in place for this season, and for next season, we do not for 2019.
So there's a question in 20, and therefore there'd be a question in 2020.
That would also be if we had to play somewhere else, we'd have to find that option.
Okay, so point. I just want to understand that point of information. Thank you.
They don't fit in T-Mobile Arena, so.
No, I recognize it. We can do arena football. It'd be great. It'd be great. Like a screaming deal. Just remind me if the PSL licenses at $250 million. The basis on those licenses was the per seat basis and the original pro forma. How much do we anticipate a per seat license to cost?
Well, if you just divide it by the number of seats in the stadium, you're going to get about 4,000 per. But they are going to range in
price. You're going to range in price.
To the extent that the event activity doesn't materialize, and believe me, we all hope it does, and we'll be there supporting it heavily. The Raiders stand behind Stadium Co., correct? The Stadium Co. is in charge of operating enterprise, activity around the financing and the event generation for Stadium Co. The Raiders stand behind Stadium Co. If in fact it's not meeting its...
There'll be their sister subsidiaries. They're not, the Raiders are not on the hook for the long-term obligations of StatCo. And the league does not permit that.
So
long-term. So there's
So
a
define
team,
what-
there's a
yeah, so
team,
help
there's
me
a
out.
team credit, and so the team has its operations, and the stadium has its operations, and that's and they're tied together by the lease. So the team will do its part by playing its home games in the stadium, and the events that are in the rev. Is that good?
I'm
Sorry.
information. I'm not.
Okay,
to
sorry.
Resolve it here. I'm just
All right,
trying to.
thank you.
There is a GMP in place. GMP.
There will be.
There will
There's
be.
not yet. No, next year.
Where they design build, there will be a GMP in place.
Yeah, and we'd be loath to accept one right now because there's not sufficient design upon
Understand
which that GMP would be reliable.
But there will be. That's encouraging. And then as it relates to the overall budget, we have seen large-scale parameters of budgets. I'm sure you've seen probably another level. Will this commission get another tiered level of budget presentation at some point? I mean, it's pretty big buckets right now. And I'd love to see, I'm not looking for every detail, but I'd love to see the next tier of budget presentation just to understand the context of where we're spending and what we're spending and where it's going to.
And I'll answer that question. That spectrum, it runs from $1.8 billion to, wow, that's way inside the confidentiality range. So we're going to have a conversation about maybe breaking the $1.8 billion up somewhat so that the public has as much as we can provide as far as visibility there. But once you start getting into, hey, our HVAC is going to cost this much, folks who haven't yet bid the HVAC contract.
I'm just trying to make sure that as we get into discussions around things that need to be accommodated on behalf of the community and the totality of it, that we're not faced with, well, there's not money for that, and then not knowing the basis for what there is and isn't money for. That's my goal in trying to understand that. And so,
thank you, Bill.
Whatever.
Thank you, Bill.
Woo-hoo! And that's certainly also possible to revisit in briefings from the Raiders and staff to individual members of the board.
Okay, great. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions from the board? Anybody on the phone that has any questions?
The rest of them, lame. Completely lame.
Your Z's coming out of the phone.
Yeah, I'm sleeping.
I have that effect on people.
Not me.
It's a benefit sometimes, you know.
Exactly.
Horrible. Only Bill Hornbuckle
we certainly appreciate
knows what to ask. The rest of the board's out to lunch.
You've done to get to this point. I appreciate again the Raiders choosing to come to Las Vegas. This stadium is, as Bill said, it's amazing. So we're excited about that. Look forward to keeping the opportunity to work with you. Thanks for coming across the country, Mr. McCabe. And we'll try not to do that to you too often. So thanks for being here. With that, we'll close agenda item 9, open agenda item 10, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Grow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, agenda item 10 is receive and review a draft resolution finding that the Oakland Raiders or their development affiliate have demonstrated adequate financial security for the performance of the financial obligations of the developer partner for the development and construction of the National Football League Stadium project as required by Section 29.1 C4 of Senate Bill 1 of the 30th Special Session of the Nevada State Legislature. Mr. Chairman, in the board packet under tab number 10, there is a draft resolution. Staff has prepared this draft resolution for the Stadium Authority Board. There will be 7 of these, one aligned to each one of the 7 findings that is set forth in Senate Bill 1. Clearly, there's additional information that's being required or asked of the Stadium Authority Board. I know that some of these, some of the financing requirements are still yet to be finalized, those type of things. But nonetheless, what we wanted to do was introduce the concept of these draft resolutions that ultimately the chairman will be asked to sign once the board has approved them. So the Stadium Authority Board has the ability to review them in advance of actually having to approve them at the end. I will tell you, Mr. Chairman, I should indicate, Mr. Chairman, that all 7 of them have now been drafted. We are working with the Raiders organization to make sure that all of those drafts are aligned so that everyone's clear in terms of what we've said. We will continue to bring those forward, but since this one is at least preliminarily drafted and is fairly straightforward because of what it requires, it is provided for the board's review today and ultimate approval at a later date.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. And this obviously, this agenda item 10 relates to agenda item 9 and the presentation that we just heard. I intend to bring this resolution back to the September meeting, and I would anticipate the opportunity for the board to approve it at that time. I would ask that if you have questions about the financial capability of the Raiders to perform this project, that you reach out soon to staff. They'll get you the answers. I'm sure the Raiders will help you get any answers to questions you may have. We've had quite a bit of briefing already. If you have questions about the document as well, please get in touch with staff. But I would anticipate bringing this back in September for discussion and approval. So, thanks. With that, we'll close agenda item 10, open agenda item 11, and I'll again turn it over to Mr. Guerrero.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, thank you for the opportunity. Agenda item number 11 is one of 3 agenda items relative to a status update on 3 separate documents that are part of the project documents that have been discussed with this board previously. This one is specific to the personal seat license marketing and sales agreement between Clark County Stadium Authority and Teamco, which is essentially the Oakland Raiders. This is in agenda tab number 11 for you. I will, should please the committee, I will go through it and try to identify the operative pieces of this document. I do want to make sure that this is clear, that the intent of this overview is to be consistent with the board's generally relative to its contents and ultimately any outstanding business items that are related in these documents, and then be brought back before the Stadium Authority Board for its ultimate approval, giving the Stadium Authority Board and the public sufficient time to review and provide comments on each one of these documents. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if it's acceptable, I'll start doing a page turn on the first of the 3 documents.
Mr. Guerrero, page turn makes me nervous, but I think we're pretty familiar with the concept that we've been through it before. As you said, just kind of pointing out the sections that are really operative, and I do have access to the public comment clock. So
thank you, sir.
Keep that in mind.
I feel the clock ticking already, sir. I recognize the downward spiral between Mr. Webb, Mr. McCabe, and ultimately me in this particular sequence of the agenda. I will first start with page 1 of the document, which doesn't have a page number. They begin on page 2. Again, I want to make sure that this is clear in terms of what this document specifically is. These are personal seat licenses. These are owned by the Stadium Authority. There are 2 things that we need to do with them. One, we need to sell those ultimately to Finance Co. that is going to utilize those dollars to give us dollars that will be deposited into a construction trust account, be used to fund the construction of the stadium. As Mr. McCabe indicated, that's $250 million, roughly, hopefully. The second piece of that is those personal seat licenses have to be sold to the public. This agreement that we're talking about here is the marketing and sales agreement. So it talks about how they will be ultimately sold to the public. Under recital number E, I think it is important to note here this particular provision. The authority is the sole owner of the right to sell personal seat licenses with respect to seating in the stadium for preseason, regular season, and postseason games played by the team in the stadium. It does exclude the Super Bowl per the requirements of the NFL. You will notice here as the business item that is outstanding, it also says and other events, including home games of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Again, Senate Bill 1, Section 32 specifically requires that if UNLV's home games are to be included in the personal seat licenses that are sold, that UNLV has to provide, it has to agree to that. It's simply part of the ongoing discussion. It's not, it's simply held as an open item respecting what is required by Senate Bill 1. I do want to note at the bottom of that same provision that the last sentence there, the last clause, says that all obligations of the authority in respect to cost and expenses in the connection with the PSL program provided for in this agreement shall be funded by and shall be payable solely from the proceeds of sales of the PSLs and the PSL licenses defined two PSL licensees defined herein, or as applicable, the proceeds generated by the sale of PSL revenues to the Stadium Funding Trust. Again, this is just a lot of legalese that essentially says that that any costs associated have to solely be limited to the revenues that are generated by the sale of the PSLs or debt incurred as a result of the PSLs. Recital F, again, talks to this concept of the sale of these. Again, I think it's important to make sure that the record is complete and the structure of this document is intended to reflect the fact that the Stadium Authority owns these and we are entering into this sale such that the proceeds can be utilized for the construction of this development. Again, this is a structure that is required, ultimately recognizing that these are patrons, most significant of which are those that are the fans of the to-be Las Vegas Raiders that will purchase these seats. Article 1, again, no reason to go through that, simply definitions. Article 2, appointment of the agent and scope of services. Article 2 is a bit important, so I do want to make sure that I go through it. Again, Section 2.1 indicates that the Team Co. will act as the authority's exclusive agent. Doesn't mean that they can't hire other agents and the like to complete that. There are two plans that are required, I guess two documents, two efforts that are required here. Section 2.2 indicates a marketing plan, something that has to be approved by the authority. The authority has an opportunity to review that, comment on it, and ultimately approve it. There's a concept of the development of a sales center that is currently contemplated in Section 2.2b. That sales center would be located at Town Square, where patrons would have the opportunity to come and purchase these agreements. Again, all called for in these documents. I do want to draw your attention to Section 2.4 of the PSL sales agreement. There are certain requirements when the PSLs themselves are sold to the licensees, again, the people that will ultimately buy them. There are certain provisions that are required to be included in there. These are listed, that any PSL related to such PSL sales agreement does not grant or provide the PSL licensee with any property right, nor does it grant or provide ownership or the interest in the stadium, which is again owned by the Stadium Authority, for release and indemnification of the authority, its directors, officers, and agents, so forth and so on. Again, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to go through each one of these provisions, but what is fundamental here is that as that transaction takes place, that none of the rights, abilities, property, or any type of liability for those sales beyond that would be the result of something like the Stadium Authority's willful misconduct or gross negligence or something along those lines be included. I do want to draw your attention, however, to page 4. Item G that's there, that also includes that the authority will not be liable for monetary damages thereunder for any reason, including an actual or alleged non-performance of persons, including the authority. Again, this is what is required by Senate Bill 1, and so it is included here. Section 2.5 talks about marketing materials. In this case, all of the intellectual property, save the team's intellectual property, is retained by the Stadium Authority Board. There are performance standards and the like that are also reflected there. Article 3 of the agreement has a number of provisions. It simply says what the term of the agreement is. I do just want to note that it's the term of the lease that we have entered into, or 10 years, whichever occurs first. There are various provisions that are required, including things like termination, none of which are extraordinary and would require specific attention here. Article 4, the PSL proceeds. Again, I will be very brief in terms of this. These PSL proceeds are ultimately deposited into a collateral account. This is monies that will ultimately go to fund the stadium itself. There are budget requirements, and again, this concept that all of the cost for the sales also have to come out of those PSL proceeds. Article 5 is the budget for the PSLs. Again, the authority shall review, comment on, and approve the original and each updated PSL budget for consistency with the terms of the agreement, which review, comment, and approval shall be accomplished by the authority in a timely manner. Again, both a marketing plan and a budget for these sales, for the sale of the PSLs are ultimately required. I do want to note that both in sections 6.1 under Article 6 as well as 6.2 deal with compensation and payment. They talk about how each one of these dollars can be used. They reflect both the idea that costs are to be repaid out of these proceeds, including commission for those individual payments. Article 7 is the assignment and subcontracting of the agreement. Again, these are very consistent with what we have seen in other documents. The idea that these rights cannot be transferred either without approval or with certain predefined conditions existing for any type of transfer. There's one provision for the PSL, for Team Co. in section 7.1, another for the authority in 7.2. Article 8 deals with confidentiality. Article 9 deals with the authority, marks, and architectural images. I will just say that those are very consistent with what the Stadium Authority Board and I think the Raiders have talked about in terms of other confidentiality requirements and other documents that you have seen. In terms of Article 9, again, I just want to point out that whatever is the Raiders' intellectual property remains theirs. There is no breaching of any of that, but any new intellectual property will inure to the benefit of the Stadium Authority Board. Article 10 deals with sub-licensing, again, just indemnification language and the existence of that and what is required. Article 11 deals with audit rights and limited audit rights to inspect, again, revenues, expenses, those type of things specific to the PSL agreement. Article 12 deals with non-discrimination, both in terms of employee non-discrimination and sales non-discrimination. Again, pretty standard. I don't think there's anything there that's particularly surprising or would otherwise be to the Stadium Authority Board. The balance of this document includes things like indemnification, insurance requirements, and then miscellaneous legal requirements. What I can tell you is that the insurance provision is consistent with what we have talked about previously. Again, the idea that there will be sufficient insurance, that it will carry over a responsible period of time. The Exhibit A, which talks about exactly what that insurance needs to entail, continues to be blank. As we get additional information on that, as this is finalized, that will be filled in. Mr. Chairman, Section 15, again, most of the provisions that have already been there in terms of all of the legal requirements, severability, and that the only additional provision that I think is probably important to note, again, just to make it part of the public record, is Section 16 and Section 16.4, which again reflects remedies and cumulative remedies, and the last sentence, notwithstanding the foregoing or any other provision of this agreement, the authority shall not be liable for money damages under the agreement for any reason, including any actual or alleged breach of non-performance by any person, including the authority. The idea is to get these PSLs sold in the most effective and efficient manner, and to ensure that those dollars are made available such that the construction of the project can move forward in its due course. With that, Mr. Chairman, that is a brief overview relative to the personal seat license marketing and sales agreement. I do have every expectation that it should be on track to be finalized as requested by you and this board in the September meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. And I'll just maybe be helpful and consolidate that a little further. We've talked about this several times. We've talked about it through the tourism infrastructure process. But the PSL process will work through the Stadium Authority Board. This document assigns TeamCo as our agent to go and completely run that process. They will also completely benefit or suffer from that process, as there is a hold harmless that Jeremy repeated several times and then ends this document, so that the Stadium Authority, Clark County, are completely held harmless. During the financial presentation, the projection of what this effort would produce is $250,000 or $250 million. If they achieve a higher number, that is to their benefit. If they achieve a smaller number, that is to their detriment, and they will have to make up that difference. And that's what this document says. So we will, you're welcome to ask questions now if you have them. We'll bring this back to the September meeting, and we'll look to approve it then. Please reach out in the meantime if you do have questions, but certainly now if you do.
Just one, Mr. Chair. Administrative costs for this from day one gets assigned to TeamCo?
The administrative cost from
selling costs.
They would have to, right? Because they can
I would
only come
presume that,
out
but
of
I'm
the
trying not to
process.
presume anything, so that's how this will work.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. We'll close agenda item 11, open agenda item 12.
Mr. Chairman, agenda item 12 is the overview of a second interim pending draft. This is the non-relocation agreement by and between Clark County Stadium Authority and, again, TeamCo. This is the non-relocation agreement that essentially provides a penalty in the event, or the unlikely event, that the Raiders organization were to leave prior to the end of the lease term that was previously reviewed and approved by this Stadium Authority board. Mr. Chairman, I will go through this in a similar manner if there's no further direction. Starting on page 1, again, I do want to make sure that this is clear overall in terms of the recitals. What we are specifically talking about here is in recital A. It says that the team is to play its home game, to make Southern Nevada its home territory, and to play the NFL home games at the stadium. That this is specifically what the non-relocation agreement is about, and particularly from this
A little buffering, folks.
Here, Article 1, I'm now on page 2, again, define terms. I won't go through that in any level of detail. However, Article 2 is worth some of our discussion. This is an obligation to maintain the franchise. This agreement also requires that TeamCo covenants to the authority that it will maintain the franchise as a valid existing NFL franchise, and the team as an NFL member. So it requires that they stay part of the NFL. I do want to note in section 2.2, the commitment to stadium, the covenant to play in the stadium. It is required to play all of its NFL home games, at the stadium. However, you will notice in 2.2a that up to one of its NFL home games outside of the stadium may be scheduled each NFL season. This is consistent with other agreements that exist.
There's your home game.
Notice that there are pending items under section 2.2b. This is in the untenantability of the stadium itself. This is essentially the reason that these items are pending, is they're business items in terms of what happens specifically For example, in the event that the stadium becomes unusable as a result of some action by the Raiders themselves. I will tell you that these are not here and intended to be pending because there was simply no ability to come to a resolution. What has happened is that the attorneys have worked through the vast majority of this draft. This is one of the business items that simply requires us to talk through it. That hasn't happened in any significant detail at this point. Again, we certainly expect to be able to come to a meeting of the minds relative to these, but as of right now, they remain open. I would like to draw your attention to section 2.2b4, which does talk about the fact that if it becomes unusable, that the Raiders are required to use commercially reasonable and diligent good faith efforts to both mitigate and overcome that period in which the stadium cannot be used. And then I'd like to draw your attention to paragraph 5, which also talks about the fact that TeamCo will use reasonable and good faith efforts to locate any alternative site that it may use within the stadium district, respecting the fact that that would be ultimately important. Paragraph C, again, this important article deals with the concept of NFL labor disputes. You believe this is outside of the control of the Raiders themselves, and there's a specific exemption to this provision for a labor dispute. Article 3 is what non-relocation. Again, one's temporary, one is permanent. It's essentially section 3.1 says during the non-relocation term, the team shall not relocate. Exactly what it might sound like. I would like to talk about prohibited actions, which is in section 3.2. It reads subject to the provisions of section 3.3, which we can go through, which is essentially a series of exemptions that during the relocation term, the TeamCo shall not apply or seek for approval from the NFL or shall not relocate or enter into substantive negotiations with third parties. There's a pending item there to try and determine what that concept means in terms of those negotiations that could happen in advance of them actually leaving and what would be prohibited there. This is different in different non-location agreements. So again, an item that we ultimately need to work through. Again, the exemptions to that I think are important. What happens in the event that the stadium is just can't be used because there's an earthquake or something along those lines that would not trigger these non-relocation requirements and the damages that would be associated as a result. Article 4 is relocation, default, and remedies, what can ultimately happen. There are really two major sets of remedies. One is essentially injunctive relief as a result of something. The other one is this concept of liquidated damages. We can essentially require or go to court to require the Raiders to stay, which will certainly be what we would intend and want to do in the event that that is not what the Stadium Authority would want it to do, or in the event that was unsuccessful, the idea would be that liquidated damages would be possible. I do want to make sure that it is clear here that there are two different concepts of default that are included under Article 4. One is an actual relocation default. This is what gives rise to something like liquidated damages. The other one is another default that doesn't rise to the same level of default. This is failure for TeamCo to keep, observe, or perform other covenants or requirements of this particular document. Again, under section 4.3, there are remedies that are lined up here, and I do want to make sure that it's clear. If the Stadium Authority Board is successful in going to court and saying, hey, look, we want the Raiders to stay, they are required to stay, and the Raiders end up staying as a result of that because the court provides that relief, that does not also lead to the liquidated damages that I'm going to talk about. In addition to that, some other minor breach of this agreement also does not lead to the level of those liquidated damages that would be there. On page 6 is where this concept of liquidated damages under section 4.6 exists. I guess I should say one thing previous to that. In section 4.5C, there is an important provision there. There's a provision that essentially says that the Stadium Authority Board will seek injunctive relief or declaratory relief So long as Mark Davis remains the owner of the team, the Stadium Authority would always be required to do that first. If Mark Davis is no longer the owner of the team, it would be at the discretion of the Stadium Authority Board whether to seek injunctive or declaratory relief, essentially requiring specific performance for them to stay, or ultimately seeking liquidated damages. Those liquidated damages, essentially the penalty paid as a result of that default, is in section 4.6. You will see there that that is blank today. I think all parties have generally agreed that that would be one of the last things that we would ultimately talk through. The issue that comes in here is the idea of what that amount would be. Would it be something along the lines of the unamortized debt that the Clark County and the Stadium Authority Board would ultimately be on the hook for in the event that the Raiders were to leave, that any outstanding debts could be paid off? Would it be something slightly more than that, something slightly less? Those are the discussions that are ongoing. Right underneath there is also a concept that is included in brackets. This is the concept of whether something would be adjusted for inflation. As Mr. Ventrelli indicated earlier, there's a significant amount of capital that comes in terms of the waterfall. In addition to that waterfall, there is also money that flows after capital and other items are paid. I do believe that there is the potential for this stadium project to be paid off early as a result of if we beat expectations in terms of room tax. And what we wouldn't want is essentially to allow a non-relocation term to exist because to be diminished as a result of the fact that the Stadium Authority paid its bonds off early. Again, this is just a business point that has not been thoroughly discussed. Clearly, in every one of these agreements, these penalties are large. They are intended to be large. It's merely a business point that remains subject to discussion. We look forward for any direction from the board and certainly to have a conversation with the Raiders about. Article 4.7 and 4.8 deal with the covenants and in terms of what could happen in terms of termination, cumulative remedies. Again, these are very consistent with at least the concepts that have been brought before the Stadium Authority Board before. In terms of Article 5, these are assignment of the franchise, and all of the rights associated with Team Coast interest in these. They have very similar requirements to what we've talked about before. If they are going to be transferred, they can be transferred with the consent of the Stadium Authority Board, unless there are conditions that have already been met, in which case the Stadium Authority Board says, okay, you can make any of these transfers. These are limited. Again, the Stadium Authority may not transfer its own rights under Section 5.4 without at any time, except as provided in other documents like the stadium lease in Article 17, says things like if the state legislature says that we have to transfer, that right exists, and so it's carried over here. Article 6 are the general provisions. Again, these are ones that we've talked about before. What law is going to be used, what authorizations, what are the powers and authority, who are controlling persons, the NFL's approval that is ultimately required and assumed to be given at the point at which this draft is issued in absence of litigation and the like. I do want to note one thing that I skipped over that I do want to make sure that is important here. There is a provision in this document that I can go back and identify specifically that says in the event that the Stadium Authority receives an amount from the Raiders, is again an unlikely circumstance that they leave, that money specifically has to be transferred back to Clark County to be used for the repayment of the bonds that were issued. So that is also included here. I bring that up as this third-party beneficiary language on page 11. Again, Mr. Chairman, pages 12, pages 13, pages 14, again, are nothing other than standard legal framework that all of our documents have reflected overall. With that, Mr. Chairman, that is a brief overview of the structure and operative content of the non-relocation agreement as it exists today. Again, our full expectation is that we will work through the outstanding issues with the Raiders, with any direction from the Stadium Authority Board, and with the expectation of attempting to bring this back for reconsideration of the Stadium Authority Board in September.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Summarizing that one, the Raiders can't leave, and if they do, we're going to charge them a whole lot of money. So there you go. What I would like to point out is that there is one other concept that has been discussed throughout the Tourism Infrastructure Committee process. We talked about it during the conversations around the lease in April and May. And that is the concept that we, like I just said, the Raiders are going to come, they're going to build this stadium, and we are going to basically tie them down on the floor of the stadium and say, if you want to get up, we are going to charge.
It's just buffering, folks. We'll be back.
We have talked about a provision, and we are working on this, and we will bring it back to the board. It will be a part of this agreement. We'll take some conversation that if in a material way the Raiders are targeted because they have agreed to come and their cost is basically sunk and they have no ability to change their mind, make a different decision, even really change the direction they're going in, that it would eliminate the financial provisions of the non-relocation agreement, or a portion of the financial provisions of the non-relocation agreement. It's basically, we made a deal, these were the terms and conditions under which we made this deal. You're agreeing to stay, you're agreeing that you will pay an enormous amount of money if you don't, and basically hand us a stadium for free, and we're saying we're going to our side of the thing to do. So just wanted to add that. Any other questions on the part of the board? This document we will revisit again in September. I think it's unlikely that we will entertain.
But right now, the non-relocation agreement remains unsigned and undone.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no further items, with your permission, we'll jump to item number 13.
Yes, please do.
In your binder, under tab 13, there are two agreements. One is entitled Form of Estoppel and Recognition Agreement. The other one is entitled Form of Estoppel and Recognition Agreement Subordinated. This is essentially an agreement that says the Stadium Authority Board is making certain assertions and that they cannot assert to the contrary, such that when Bank of America enters in to these formal loan agreements, that they have assurances that what they understand the deal to be actually is, and that the Stadium Authority Board will not assert anything to the contrary. These two agreements, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to just go through them together, if that's okay, because they are extremely similar in terms of content. I will tell you that what makes them different is that there are actually two transactions. One transaction is between Finance Co. and the team. Mr. McCabe referenced it in terms of the six.
You know, at this point, I would caution against making hypotheticals regarding the future of this project.
Are occurring, and both of which require what is a senior estoppel and recognition agreement and a subordinated one, with the PSL piece being the subordinated portion of that.
Mr. Guerrero, before you, as you keep saying briefly, go through these documents, could you could you explain what the role of the board is in with respect to these documents and what we should be looking for as you talk through them?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. The role of these documents is to provide necessary insurance to Bank of America such that they know that the lease agreement is in place as is required by Senate Bill 1. That the development agreement is in place as required by Senate Bill 1. That we are not aware of any adverse condition as laid out in here. And I'll talk through each one of those in just a moment. But that so before they actually can make that loan, because it specifically says in this agreement that they're unwilling to make those loans until such time as they have the assurances that this board is not going to come back and essentially contest that conditions that they believe to exist don't exist. And those may be agreements between other parties, but this board has sufficient power relative to those agreements, and they want to make sure that they are clear and not disputable.
Thank you.
You bet. On page 1 of both of these documents is a series of recitals. Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to go through these because I believe this board has seen so many of these. They essentially say the state legislature has created the stadium authority, that it created a financing mechanism for it, that STADCO has been created, that a lease agreement has been entered into, the development agreement has been entered into, all of those type of things. Under page 2 in both of the documents, I'm just looking at the subordinated one here for a moment, but such a provision exists in both of them. It says, whereas in order to fund certain financings, Finance Co. shall obtain a loan in principal amount of $850 million. Again, this is simply the conditions that are needed relative for that specific loan to be made. In this particular one, it's the subordinated note. In the senior one, it is simply $600 million for that particular loan to the Stadium Events Company. The statements that are contained herein, I do believe, are particularly important in terms of what it is that the Stadium Authority is saying. I'm going to begin under representations on page 2. The authority hereby represents to Finance Co., the collateral agents, the lenders, including without limitation Bank of America, the following as of the date hereof. 1, the authority is the owner of the stadium project. 2, the authority is not sold or encumbered the stadium. 3, the operating lease agreement is in effect. 4, the lease agreement as approved allows for the subordinated leasehold deed of trust. You will remember that as part of the lease agreement, we said that the Raiders have the ability to obtain all of the revenues that are generated by the stadium. This is the position that they are put in. They don't own the land, they don't own the assets, but what they do own is the cash flow. This is very valuable. It is the security the Bank of America and the other lenders will ultimately require. The STADCO will be required to essentially say, hey, in the event that we do not fulfill our obligations under the loan, Bank of America and the lenders have the ability to step in and receive those cash flows. That's exactly what we're simply saying, that what is called for in the lease, that we have reviewed it and we believe that this subordinated, in this case STADCO leasehold deed of trust, is available to provide that level of security. That there is no other assignment, that no notice of violation of law has been received, that STADCO has fulfilled its obligation known to the Stadium Authority, that no notice of eminent domain has existed, that no notice of another leasehold mortgagee, that somehow the Raiders have gone and sold it to somebody else, that we haven't received anything along those lines, that the development agreement exists, that STADCO has performed its obligations under the development agreement, and so forth. On the top of page 4 is what I think is a material provision, and that says that anywhere the Stadium Authority has to provide its knowledge, this means actual knowledge, not required. We don't have a duty of inquiry or investigation that should be construed that we have to somehow know that everything that the Raiders have done. We don't have any, the Stadium Authority doesn't have any obligations relative to that. There are miscellaneous provisions. I think all of them are important, but the one that I wanted to point out is that once the recorded subordinate STADCO leasehold deed of trust or the other one in the senior document are recorded, we are saying that meets the requirements of section 17.2G of the lease agreement, which essentially says that we are giving the lender the ability to step in the event STADCO, in that case, doesn't perform under its obligations for that loan. And with that, Mr. Chairman, it is a brief overview, an attempt to be a brief overview of both of these agreements. Again, They are very similar in nature and very much aligned in terms of intent. I appreciate your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Any questions, Mr. Evans?
Yes, just one real quick one, and thank you, Jeremy. Excellent job this afternoon. Very quickly, one thing that comes up sometimes with construction is construction or mechanics liens. Is any of that, is this not, or is this the type of document that would need to address that?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, the answer to that question is that we have a substantial amount of lien language, what can be in, what can't be in, what are the process in the event that a lien is put on something, and how it has to be remedied. All of that is handled in the lease agreement itself, and those protections carry forward here.
Other questions? Okay. I just want to say, I'm glad to see we have 14 documents instead of 13, because that makes me feel better for some reason. It just seems like a better thing. But I do want to say, thanks to the Raiders, to Dan Ventrelli, Jeremy and Brian and your whole staff, Melanie. You get a sense of how much work this is. And as we get to October and we stack all these documents up and we have some kind of signing ceremony for these 14 documents, you'll get a better sense of the enormity of paperwork that needs to be done in order to make this happen. And frankly, we could not have a better group of people working on making this happen while they do their real job, like running football teams and running the play analysis. So our outside counsel have been very instrumental in all of these documents. Mr. Otto was not able to be here today. We did not feel that that was really a detriment to the board meeting today. He has been blessed this process. He's worked very much hand in hand with Jeremy, and that goes obviously equally for the Raiders team and their attorneys as well. So anyway, thanks for all that work, and I know there's a little bit left to do. So. Thank you, sir. Okay, we'll close agenda item 13, open agenda item 14. I'll talk about this just a little bit. We can get direction from the board today. We can bring it back for direction from the board in September. But this is a discussion about next steps, or maybe the initial steps in sending a request for qualification or proposal for either an owner's representative.
That is
the development agreement. It's in terms of the Stadium Authority having a development compliance officer. That's kind of the direction that we really would recommend that we head in. We think that is an appropriate level of oversight and involvement on behalf of the Stadium Authority. One of the reasons that I went back to Mr. McCabe with B of A to talk about the process of holding this project within budget is that once a design has been approved, our interests are very much aligned with Bank of America. We're going to want to get this project built according to a design that has been approved and within the budget, so that we can make sure that it does get built. They will take a very strong role in making sure that that happens, and then in the ordinary course of business, but happen correctly. For the Stadium Authority to hire someone to repeat that process and do everything that the firm that Bank of America will hire, instead of doing that with that firm, seems expensive, prone to delay the project, and completely unnecessary. We need to be involved enough to know what we're doing, know what's going on, but we think that there's an appropriate level for that is represented by the development compliance officer. We've included in your board binder kind of a recommended or an initial scope of work.
that owner's rep or development compliance officer would work from and respond to in a request for qualifications. So I guess the question is, and I would probably recommend, because I don't think we're in, the one final thought I'll add, is that we have to work within the budget that was allocated in SB1. We have $1 million to spend until the bonds are issued, and after that we will have $2 million a year for every year after that. But the $1 million from when we started until when bonds are issued, and it looks as if bonds will probably be issued in the April or May timeframe. We don't have much money left, so we could potentially bring someone on for $50,000 or so between now and April or May, and then ramp that up from there. But that is the extent of our, roughly the extent of our available budget between now and the time that bonds are issued. So, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, Mr. Guerrero?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, okay. So we wanted to introduce the concept. We wanted to give you kind of a straw man scope of work to work from. It really would be my recommendation that we not try and narrow that down unless everybody's had an opportunity to review it and just wants to go ahead. But if anyone has any question about that, given our situation, there's really not much of a rush. We can easily bring this back in September. So I'd entertain going in either direction.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think conceptually, I think it's the right thing to do. It feels redundant not to be in line with the bank of note. I guess, because you may not be here in September. Complete transparency, access to the same information, some, again, ongoing reporting cycle would be critical, I think, in that.
Yeah, and actually, as you bring that up, it brings up one other point that I would recommend that we postpone this until September. Much of this is addressed in the development agreement, and so we have mirrored the scope of work to the requirements and the responsibilities in the development agreement that we'll have with the team. And so I don't know that that information will exactly mirror what the team's agreement with the bank is, but it will be sufficient for me. Ultimately, when we're done with that agreement, it will be sufficient for us. We should really, because we haven't seen a draft of the development agreement yet, the board hasn't, we should postpone any action on this until September.
Mr. Chairman, if it's acceptable to the board, it might be helpful for staff just to spend a little bit more time exploring what the options look like, so that we can be a little bit more knowledgeable in terms of our ability to bring back true options to the board relative to what actually could be done.
I don't think anybody would have any objection to that, Mr. Guerrero. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on that topic? Okay, we will close agenda item 14, open agenda item 15, which is public comment, which I don't know if you were just tired of sitting or wanted to make sure you were first in line, but welcome.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, my name is Patricia Martinelli Price, like I said before, a native Las Vegan, and it's nice to see a colleague from Bank of America, because I know he works very closely with our Indian nations, and my uncle at one time was president CEO of Bank of America, both in San Francisco and here in Nevada. But anyway, I'm excited about the stadium. As you all know, I'm actually really a Steelers fan, but my kids are Raiders fans, so I have 7 kids and 13 grandchildren, so I've gotten enough feedback from them. They love the Raiders. So just so you know, one of the things, and not to be disrespectful of the Raiders, but this is what I thought it'd be interesting, because I'm like I said, I've been a Steeler fan since the 70s. That ages me. I'm a great grandmother now. But it would have been an interesting thing too, the Nevada, or let's say the Steelers, the Nevada Steelers or the Las Vegas Steelers, because let's face it, we have gaming. So like my dad said, you don't need to put a gun to their head. They come and gamble and leave the money here. But anyway, one of the things that I was going to say that is pretty important, we need to make sure, of course, and thank you, Mr. Hornbuckle, for addressing that, to make sure that, our community really benefits from that. I know the lady here that is in charge with the Mortensen. We've sent her like over 300 people that have signed up, so it's very exciting. And they've been having those meetings, so I'm excited about that. The second thing that I have to say, number one, is the veterans. I'm very concerned about our veterans, our disadvantaged and working poor families, that they get some of those jobs. I was meeting today with the Speedway people from here, from Nevada, and they have, a major foundation. The question that I have for the Raiders, especially since they've been in Los Angeles and then, in two different sections of California, are they going to be having, or do you have actually a foundation to help our community, especially the disadvantaged and the working poor and our homeless families? I wanted to ask that. That's important to me.
Thank you, Ms. Martinelli Price. Public comment is not for questions, but
I'll answer. I'll answer it afterwards. I'll check it.
Great, thanks. Anyone else? Everybody's trying to make friends today. Mr. O'Sullivan, it was just one time each today. No twice. Yes, thanks.
Good.
Okay, we will close agenda item 15. The answer, I believe, Mr. Beding will respond to Ms. Martinelli Price. Thank you. Appreciate it, everybody. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
It's the easiest motion to get. Thank you.
All right, so that's adjourned, and I will now entertain some questions.
Like I'm on pretty solid ground when I say accountability is here to stay in public.
I will entertain some questions around it. I'm not going to read all of your comments because they're too numerous, and I've let them go by just to pay attention to what was said, particularly when Mr. McCabe spoke from Bank of America. So that's, I will say one thing, and so that, first of all, for anyone who believes that this project is done, it's far from it. This is very complicated. It's a very complicated go. And one thing that I got out of the exchange is that first of all, Bank of America is only financing some of the project. When it comes to such things as the streets and the light standards and the off-site non-transportation development costs, as well as the off-site transportation development costs, it's not clear to me that Bank of America is going to finance that. They have a limit, they have a box, and that's it, okay? What that means is that the Raiders are responsible for any costs beyond it. That Bank of America's financing is not going to cover all of that, so there's a gap. So the document that I wrote discussing this $815 million deficit stands because only Bank of America is covering the financing that deals with the stadium. This is not a Sheldon Adelson situation where Mr. Adelson was going to write a check for everything. That's not what Bank of America is doing at all. Also, the whole matter of the leasehold is no news. That's not news. Basically, it's a vessel, the stadium. It generates revenue. The Raiders will play within that vessel. If, for whatever reason, they can't pay the loan to Bank of America, then Bank of America has the right to basically evict them, with the behest of the stadium before, with the cooperation, of course, of the stadium authority. All right. As far as the non-relocation agreement is concerned, excuse me. As far as the non-relocation agreement is concerned, let me say this. It's not done at all. And not only that, the Raiders have left themselves a powerful out. So, and the powerful out is this. It's when the Raiders returned from Los Angeles to Oakland, they left to the Coliseum Joint Powers Authority in the form of something called the Coliseum, the Oakland Football Marketing Association, the job of selling PSLs. They left it to the public. That's the same situation this time. When the PSLs didn't sell, Amy Trask wrote a letter that I received along with the mayor of Oakland, along with Dina McClain, who ran the Joint Powers Authority, along with the city manager, to cut to the chase, that expressed dismay with not just the naming rights negotiations, but also the ticket sales and the fact that tickets were not going to be lifetime, and basically sought a restructured lease, which Dina McClain interpreted to mean that the Raiders were going to seek to break their lease and relocate, because the Raiders had made noises about going back to Los Angeles because of the way things were going with the PSLs. As a way of stopping them, we sued the Raiders first. Las Vegas has set up exactly the same situation. You hear what I'm saying? Las Vegas has set up exactly the same situation. Exactly the same. So that's a big issue for the Raiders. It has to be. Let's see here. It's, as far as any questions, let's see here. I think, right, Maurice Keith says Oakland football marketing 2.0. Basically what this is Raiders deal 2.0, okay? This is Raiders deal. That's what this is. This is Raiders deal 2.0. All right, it is Raiders deal 2.0 Vegas. That's exactly what you're looking at. Raiders deal 2.0 Vegas. Now, as far as what's going on here, excuse me for a second. I've got to refresh that screen, okay? It's Raiders deal 2.0. Raiders deal 2.0. So here we go. I'm gonna Raiders deal 2.0. Eliminate that. And anybody has any questions? All right, hold the. Okay, here we go. All right. So now what I want to do is focus on any questions you have that came out of that, so we can focus on a dialogue, okay? So anybody have any questions that we can deal with? We've got, as Maurice Keith says, yes, Hornbuckle is seeing it, but probably doesn't have the juice to stop it. And Dorian asks, has there been any talks in Oakland for a new stadium if the Raiders and the Vegas deal go south? Well, Dorian, as I've said before, and I'll say again, Fortress has the stadium plan, and that's there. Now, the problem between the city of Oakland and the Oakland Raiders and the Oakland A's in terms of the Oakland Athletics kind of hogging the Coliseum and not making a wholesale decision to move to Jack London or Victory Court, that's still outstanding. The problem in Oakland right now is that we have not had a come-to-Jesus moment where we say, hey, you know what? We need to figure out how we can make this Raiders deal happen for us in a way that is implementable beyond what we've done with Fortress and try to turn around the tide. That hasn't happened. Okay? Now, let's see here. Now, Boss asks, why did Bedane lie about the Raiders working on ingress and egress and tailgating for years? Well, look, the Raiders first of all, let me explain the situation. Let me do this very diplomatically, but out of respect for Mark Bourdin, because I do like Mark as a person. I don't want to give off the impression that I don't. Okay. Mark's job as president is to put the Raiders in the best light. Now, yes, we have serious issues with how the Raiders have handled their leasehold, if you will, in Oakland since they returned. Serious issues. But what is there to gain for Mark to basically bring those up in Las Vegas? What good does he get out of it? What good do the Raiders get out of it? Nothing. We do know the truth, and that's why you have public areas like this one. That's why you have blogs. That's why you have social media. That's why you have courts, okay? So that those issues can be appropriately dealt with there. But to expect Mark to tell the complete 1,000% truth about the history between this Oakland and the Oakland Raiders that's not going to happen. However, it does speak to the weakness of the Las Vegas Stadium Authority. We only have Bill Hornbuckle of MGM asking the hard questions, Ken Evans asking questions that have to do with community benefits, and that's it. Everyone else is they're just sitting there. They're just like vegetables, okay? So they just like vegetables. So Maurice Keith says, so Adelson's lobbyists negotiated the community benefits in SB1. Why are the Raiders calling it a shakedown now? Well, the whole point is that I don't see that the Raiders are calling it a shakedown because, as I understand it, it's essentially the job of the Raiders to implement it. In fact, it was said so, my goodness, 4 months ago in the context of these meetings. So the Raiders can't at all look at this as a shakedown. But you did mention Adelson. You have to remember something. Adelson is not in the picture. If Adelson were in the picture, there would be no need for Bank of America's presentation in that way. So there you go. And Bank of America's presence does indicate, given the scope of their financing, that Adelson is still not involved. So, there you go. And not only that, I would take a lot of time and pay attention to the questions Bill Hornbuckle asks, because he represents the casino community. And if his tone sounds sarcastic, you can pretty well bet that tone represents how the casino industry locally feels about the deal. So, all right. So, Boss says, MLB wants A's downtown. Did I know that? That would be great, but I think that they needed to do a good job of yelling it out. They haven't. And the mayor needs to do a job of basically directing them downtown, setting up a plan, making it formal, including video and artist renditions, and moving forward. The mayor hasn't done that. So, I don't see that we've been appreciably aware of where we need to, as a city, discuss what we didn't do right and what we did do right and how to move forward effectively. Again, Oakland is not proving it has the will and the initiative to complete big projects. It just sort of washes its hand of actions without a coherent plan to move forward. That has not changed. So, let's see here. How's it going to look when it's all private? Yeah. So, let's see here. What other questions? Oh, Richard Carson says the 14 points aren't actually on point. They're too vague, too general. Can you comment on the 14 points and if they are to point to Vegas, too general, and what they move forward? Richard Carson, I don't know anything about 14 points, but I knew that there are 14 agreements. Many of the agreements are still undone. We have not appreciably moved forward. We've had a great layout. I believe the Stadium Authority website's going to have, I'm pretty certain it's going to have some good, let me see here, very good new things that I can download, right? We can download. In fact, I'm investigating that right now to see if that's the case. But there has been, essentially no new movement. We have a situation where we have a lot of stuff still outstanding. That's what we've got. So, okay, now we have, yes, we do. We have all of the background materials they talked about that were not on the site prior to meeting. They are now there. The SB1 finding, the Raiders presentation on financing plan, the Raiders presentation on stadium project status. All of this is here. Room tax revenue summary report, which I've already downloaded. The personal seat licensing agreement, which is there. The non-relocation agreement draft is there. The estoppel and recognition is there. The owner's representative agreement, all that which was presented at today's meeting is all on the Stadium Authority website for download and analysis, okay? So, yeah, so there we go. I apologize for anybody that was blocked, but I have to keep some semblance of order, and I had to make a call. And if I say, hey, if anyone has any questions, I would appreciate the value of my time spent asking me questions rather than internecine arguments that, at the end of the day, are not going to provide any value to this conversation. So, okay, so there we go. So again, anyone have any questions? And please also invest. I encourage you to invest. PayPal, thank you. And so 831 Scott says, and 831 Scott, thank you very much for your significant investment last night. 831 Scott says, too bad the A's aren't going to pick Howard Terminal. It is, you know, but it is too bad. And it's here's where we have a leadership vacuum. You know, we really do. And I hate to say that about my god sister, but there it is. Maurice Keith says, Zinni, the area presented for possible parking spaces in the developer presentation, is that land next to Bali High or other parcels that could possibly be purchased? That is Bali High. That's Bali High. That's parked over. But that's going to cost $195 million. It's one thing for someone to say, well, yeah, all those spaces can be fit there. But you remember that Bali High is a land parcel that is of equal size to the Raiders parcel. They haven't bought it. In the length of time that has elapsed between this stadium concept being just that and where we are today, that price for Bali High has doubled. So let's say that they're going to buy it for $77 million, which is what was used for buying the Raiders property at Russell Road, right? Well, arguably that's at 145, well, it's over double. It's 195 million. Why? Because of the most recent transaction there. Why? Because the Raiders are trying to build a new stadium there, and you have all these people lining up to basically, they're like sharks trying to consume what land they can to get in position for what's going to be the next big thing in terms of land ownership. Getting land at buy low and sell high. They're trying to buy low, and even right now, it's driving up the price of land that the Raiders need to acquire for parking. That's a big problem, okay? So we've got, with 14 agreements being talked about today, with them not really being agreed upon or any open for discussion, do you think October 1 deadline will be met? No, I don't. I can't see that. That's the one prediction I'm not afraid to make, because everything's being pushed to September. I can't see that. Again, anyone can do a groundbreaking, anytime they want to. And it doesn't mean that the Raiders won't schedule one. However, what I have to get to know is if they can do a groundbreaking and not have all the permits lined up. Because they do own the land. So the question that I have to have answered is, under what conditions can the Raiders do a groundbreaking? They own the land. Can they, what can they do that under? And that's that question I don't know the answer to, but I'll find out. So, And Maurice Keith says, oh, Bad Moon says, Zinni, there's a date when you guys, questions are going by fast and furious. Hey, an investment. Please, an investment sometime. There are now 61 people watching. Thank you very much. This is fantastic. Everyone wants to talk and ask questions. Please, that's great. But some investment would be fantastic. At any rate, Zinni, is there a date when the huge financial shortcomings you point out to will be addressed in these meetings? Well, that won't happen until May, because April or May of next year. And the reason is that, first of all, we'll know what the project will really cost then. That's the first thing. We're going to have an idea of how the sponsors are or are not going to line up. That's another thing. We are going to see where the economy is going. Because, look, here's one thing here's a problem that I see on the horizon. When the SNTIC, the Southern Nevada Tourism and Infrastructure Committee, introduced this plan for, hey boss, I'll see you. Okay. Introduced this plan, all right? When they introduced the plan, SNTIC, the proposed tax rate was 1%. Then it was lowered. First of all, it started off this. It started off at 0.7% of 1%. Then they did another one analysis that had it at 1%. They took that when they lowered it to 88/100ths of 1%. The 1% gave them a nice waterfall. But what's going on with the 88/100ths of 1% tax rate is that because of whatever happening in the hotel market that's causing perhaps a slight decline in total occupancy, it's having an impact on the tax revenue that's collected. Why? Because it started off at around 5 million 4 months ago, but now it's at 3.8 million, and the overall trend is downward. Is that indicating a recession? What does that point to? Is that some reflection of impact on other places to go gambling like Macau? What's going on there? And how low will it go? Because if it goes to 3.7, you don't want it to go to 3.4. If it goes to 3.4, they're in trouble. Okay? And that's the mother's milk of this whole deal. That money goes to finance the construction of the stadium. All right? So we'll have a better picture of where things are by April of next year. And we'll have a better picture of where we're going to be between now and then, because we're going to be, of course, monitoring this like a hawk. So we've got, Zinni, where do you predict the A's will go? Well, I hate to predict on things. I think the question is, where would I like them to go? And that's why I say everyone likes to predict things. I don't understand why, as opposed to advocate. All right? And maybe that's something that's changing in society. Why are people so afraid to advocate for things? I believe the A's should be downtown. As to where they're going to go right now, it's hard to say, because the city as a whole has not banded together and said, okay, A's, you go here. Here's the resources, you're going here. The leadership has been happy with the idea of allowing them to, kind of float around, experiment here, go here, that sort of thing, all right? And Karen Christensen asks, will there have to be protective parking because of paint jobs getting in bland? There's no regulation that calls for that, Karen, at all. Richard says if they can't get going in November, that means the 2020 opening will get pushed back to 2021. That's right. That's what that means. And right now, they've tried to put a nice picture on all of this, but given the move back because of the FAA, and I know that they're disappointed. I can hear that. given the fact that the FAA hasn't made a decision, and because the FAA hasn't made a decision, Clark County can't act. And Clark County sure is not going to be able to act by September 15th, which is the next scheduled date. That's going to push everything back, and it's going to push the Raiders back to where 2020 is a difficult go. I can't see them doing it. And they're trying to put a rosy picture on the FAA and everything. But again, the FAA gave a thumbs up for one particular type of radar. One. Not all of them, just one. They gave it for VFR, but not for they gave it for VFR, but not IFR, if memory serves. But it wasn't across the board. And no one bothers to scroll down and read the whole of what was written. So it's like, oh yeah, they're fine. Well, nah, that dealt with one particular type of radar frequency, not the whole enchilada. That's why they're seeking public comment. So, okay. Karen says, I think I got that one. All right, so right now, it's 7:39. I'm going to come back. I said I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to come back and do this. I would invest, folks, you know. I'm exhausted right now. It's 7:39. I need to eat dinner. And I'll be back at 11:30 Eastern. It's 7:39 Eastern right now. And, okay. Anybody else have any parting thoughts or questions or anything that they want to get off their chest within reason? Richard Carson says, do you think the NFL will jump in to save the Raiders or stay out to have Mark sell? It depends on the numbers and whether or not it's doable, okay? And 831 Scott says, Zinni, do you think the Raiders get a ton of backlash from angry fans this year that they will play somewhere else next year? Well, here's the thing. As Bedane said, they're locked in for this year and next year. But it's 2019 and 20 that they're not certain of. As to how the fans will react, here's what I think the fans should do. The fans should lobby the JPA for the Raiders to get an extension and then lobby the JPA in the city. What I don't get about this society right now is why there's so many people who are just lemmings. They sit back and they watch things rather than getting involved in things, unless, of course, you could consider that stupid tiki march. And that ended up with somebody losing their life. But is that what society has come to? That common people only got out and act and they only walk the streets and protest rather than calling their council members, getting involved in projects in cities like Oakland and having them move on matters where jobs are created? I'm asking. Because there's a lot of predicting going on rather than, hey, we should we should do this. Everyone waits on somebody else to do something. Be the change. Call the mayor's office, you know? So, all right. So, I'm going to deal with all your other questions tomorrow. Not tomorrow, but I mean tonight. I'll be back tonight. Tomorrow, too. I said I was going to do one tomorrow. All right? So, thank you, Mr. Carlson. And, hey, look, like I said, if you can, Richard, if you can put in $2, that's $2 I didn't have, and it's worth the effort. But I will be back tonight, later, okay? I'll see everybody. Thank you. See ya.